Hello there and welcome to Secretum Histories, where curiosity settles in gently and ancient mysteries drift softly into the quiet spaces of the night. Thank you for being here, wherever you happen to be listening from, and whatever hour your own world has arrived at. Tonight, we're going to wander into a story shaped by moonlight, legend, and the long, slow rhythm of civilizations that once mapped their entire existence to a shimmering crescent in the sky. Tonight, we drift toward Nanna, the ancient Anunnaki moon god, the one who governed time, fate, and the great turning cycles that carried humanity from one age to the next. Before we begin this quiet journey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what the night looks like above you. Whether your sky is clear, clouded, or hidden behind the soft glow of city lights, the moon above you is the same one that guided temples, kings, farmers, and astronomers thousands of years ago. If you find this little corner of quiet storytelling soothing, or it helps you unwind after a busy day, I'd be grateful if you considered liking the video or subscribing. It helps this peaceful space reach others who might be looking for a moment of calm too. Now take a breath, settle in, and let the world slow down around you, because the story waiting for us tonight reaches back to the earliest memories of humanity, to a time when every phase of the moon carried meaning, and every shift in its light whispered something about destiny, seasons, and the subtle geometry of existence. Long before clocks, calendars, or written histories, people watched the night for guidance. They looked upward, trusting the slow, deliberate movement of the moon to tell them when to plant, when to travel, when to rest, and when to honour the unseen forces shaping their world. And at the centre of that sky, steady and dependable, was the figure they believed watched over everything with patient, luminous attention. They called him Nanna. His presence was not sudden or sharp. It felt more like the quiet arrival of evening, something natural, steady, familiar. His crescent shape appeared with comforting regularity, marking the boundary between one part of life and the next. For ancient cultures that built their understanding of the universe from what they could see with their eyes alone, the moon was more than a distant sphere of rock. It was a living sign, a guide, a record keeper, a witness to everything happening on Earth. Its cycles were the closest thing humanity had to a universal clock, long before hours, minutes, or mechanical devices existed. Under that soft glow lived stories about a god who measured the pace of existence itself. The world Nanna belonged to was not quiet or simple. It was full of gods who debated in heavenly councils, heroes who shaped rivers and mountains, and cosmic events that carried storms, floods, and renewal across the land. Yet even in a pantheon filled with noise and power, Nanna's domain was one of calm steadiness. While other gods hurled winds or commanded cities or forged destinies through acts of force, he shaped reality through rhythm. He didn't need to announce his presence. Humanity simply felt it. The moon rose, the moon set, and with each cycle people understood that time was moving forward in a predictable way. They counted its phases like footsteps. They aligned their lives to its pattern. They built their earliest calendars around its shape. In that sense, Nanna wasn't only a god of the moon, he was the keeper of continuity, the one who let people trust that life had an order, even when day-to-day events felt uncertain or chaotic. The civilizations that honoured him did not separate the night sky from the affairs of their world. They believed every shift in the heavens reflected something happening on Earth, and every shift on Earth echoed something happening above. This gave the moon immense influence. When crescent became half, and half became full, the night brightened and the world felt watched over. People travelled farther, worked later into the evening, held gatherings, and carried out tasks that required visibility. When the moon waned and darkness returned, a different kind of life emerged, quieter, more careful, more reflective. Nanna presided over both moods with equal steadiness. The illuminated nights became a symbol of abundance and clarity, while the darkened nights carried a sense of renewal and inwardness. Everything circled, repeated, stretched, and returned, reminding ancient people that fate itself worked in loops rather than lines. The temple city of Ur, one of the most influential centres of early Mesopotamian civilization, rose under his symbol. Its inhabitants believed Nanna chose the city as one of his earthly homes, and they built monumental structures to honour his role in their lives. Priests watched the sky from high platforms, recording each appearance of the moon with precision. These records weren't simple observations. They shaped agriculture, trade, navigation, and religious ceremonies. In a world where predicting the future meant survival, knowing the moon's path felt like receiving guidance straight from the divine. And because Nanna presided over these cycles, people believed he didn't just illuminate the night, he illuminated fate. His identity stretched across cultures and languages. To the Sumerians he was Nanna, to the Akkadians he was Sin. In different eras he carried different titles, but his essence remained the same. He was the one who marked the passing of the months. He was the one who signalled when certain rituals should begin. He was the one who spoke through the shifting patterns of light and shadow. And even though his presence was quiet compared to the dramatic stories of storm gods or war gods, he shaped daily life more consistently than almost any other figure in early mythology. There is something interesting about how the ancient world approached time. They didn't think of it as a separate thing, detached from the natural world. Time wasn't a concept to define so much as a pattern to observe. Its flow could be seen in moonlight, mirrored in tides, and felt in the shifting seasons. It didn't rush, it didn't fragment, it didn't push people from one moment to the next. Instead, it guided them slowly, predictably, like a hand moving across a surface in a steady motion. In many ways, Nanna wasn't only the ruler of celestial movement. He was the personification of the world's earliest understanding of time as something cyclical, rather than linear. People trusted the moon because its phases never lied. It didn't hurry and it didn't break routine. It gave them confidence that even during difficult periods life would continue moving, shifting, changing, and circling back around. That sense of predictable change allowed early societies to flourish, because they could plan for the future with a kind of certainty that didn't exist before the development of lunar calendars. And as long as Nanna held his steady position in the sky, people believed fate itself could be understood, interpreted, or even influenced. The stories about Nanna often depicted him travelling across the sky in a shining boat, his curved vessel mirroring the crescent shape that appeared above the world. This boat wasn't simply a symbol. It carried meaning for early navigators who relied on stars and phases of the moon to measure distance and direction during their journeys. The moon's predictable rise and fall gave travellers a sense of orientation that no terrestrial marker could consistently provide. And because of this, Nanna became connected not only with timekeeping and fate, but with guidance itself. The idea that he carried light through the darkness wasn't just symbolic, it was practical, rooted deeply in the lived experience of people who needed the night sky to find their way across long, unmarked stretches of land. Priests and astronomers in Ur believed Nanna's movement wasn't random or decorative. They believed it was a coded message about destiny. Every shift in brightness, every moment the moon disappeared into darkness, and every return of its light held significance. And so they organised their observations with meticulous care. Months were counted not by arbitrary numbers but by the renewal of the crescent. Festivals were set by the appearance of certain phases. Contracts, legal matters, and political decisions often aligned with lunar cycles because fate was thought to be more favourable during particular points in the moon's journey. And while this system may seem distant from modern timekeeping, it laid the foundation for many of the patterns the world still uses today. Nanna's influence reached beyond the physical world. Ancient texts describe him as a judge in the divine realm, someone who weighed decisions with calm precision. Other gods might act with emotion, force, or sudden change, but Nanna's nature was measured. He governed cycles rather than storms. continuity rather than conflict. This made him a stabilizing figure even in stories where tempers among the gods ran high. When disputes arose, his presence represented clarity, order, and the steady movement of time that refused to be interrupted by chaos. Sitting beneath the night sky thousands of years ago, early astronomers likely felt a kind of reassurance each time the moon reappeared after its dark phase. They understood this pattern intimately, and because of it, they trusted that the world around them followed a structure larger than themselves. Life could be uncertain, but the moon was always returning. Fate might be unclear, but the markers guiding it would remain steady. This reliability allowed them to build civilizations around predictable cycles of planting, harvesting, trade, and ritual, and it allowed them to create stories that gave meaning to the cosmos, and it allowed them to believe in a universe shaped by intention instead of accident. The memory of Nanna's influence didn't fade when empires shifted or languages changed. His symbolism continued through new rulers, new cultures, new eras of knowledge. The moon remained a universal guide, and so did the ideas tied to it. Measurement, renewal, direction, and interpretation. Even today, the lunar cycle plays a role in traditions, calendars, and rituals across the world. And although modern astronomy explains the phases of the moon through mechanics and geometry, the ancient sense of quiet significance still lingers whenever we look up at night and see that familiar glow. As we move forward tonight, we'll follow the earliest footsteps that carried people from simple observation into the beginnings of belief, and from belief into complex systems of timekeeping and divination that shaped entire civilizations. Because long before clocks divided the day into numbers, and long before science mapped the orbit of celestial bodies, humanity trusted the night sky as its first teacher. And in that sky, Nanna watched with a calm presence that still feels steady, even across the vast distance of ages. Now that the quiet glow of the moon has guided us gently through its first story, we can trace the beginnings of how its light became a presence, a personality, and eventually a god whose influence reached further than any horizon the ancient world could see. The earliest people who lifted their eyes toward the night sky did not see empty darkness or distant rock. They saw something alive moving above them in a calm, steady rhythm that returned, again and again without fail. In those first moments when humanity began to understand its place beneath the heavens, the slim crescent that appeared after nights of darkness felt like a sign that the world was still functioning as it should, that life was stepping from one phase into another. This returning curve of pale light became one of the first patterns our ancestors learned to trust, and in that slow process of observation, something shifted inside the human experience. The sky was no longer simply a backdrop. It became a map, a guide, a companion that carried meaning in every shift of its glow. And the crescent, with its delicate outline against the dark, was the first marker of the moon god who would later be known as Nanna. In those early times, people did not separate themselves from the world around them as we often do today. They lived in environments where survival depended on reading signs correctly, where small details in weather, river levels, animal migrations, and plant cycles meant the difference between abundance and hardship. When they looked up and saw the first faint arc of the moon reappearing after a period of absence, it wasn't a simple observation. It was reassurance. The world continued to turn. The heavens continued to follow their paths. The great forces that governed existence had not changed or abandoned them. When the crescent rose over the horizon, it felt like receiving a message from something older, wiser, and deeply patient. The first light of the crescent was always quiet. It didn't arrive with force. It didn't overwhelm the night. Instead, it slid gently above the land, offering just enough brightness to shift the mood of darkness without scattering it. This delicate balance between light and shadow shaped how ancient people understood Nanna's nature. He wasn't associated with storms, fire, or destruction. He didn't announce himself with thunder or wind. He arrived on his own time, following a cycle that could not be rushed. His presence was subtle, steady, and dependable. To early societies, this was one of the most comforting forms of divinity, a god who spoke not through sudden power, but through consistency. The connection between the moon's reappearance and the beginning of timekeeping happened slowly, almost unconsciously. At first, people simply noticed that the returning crescent always followed a certain pattern. They began linking events in their lives to these recurring shapes. The return of the crescent might have coincided with seasonal changes. It might have aligned with the movement of herds, the opening of particular flowers, or the rise and fall of river waters. These patterns allowed them to anticipate the world rather than react to it blindly, and with anticipation came the earliest forms of planning. When the first settlements emerged and communities grew, the moon became more than a background presence. It became a scheduling device long before numbers or written symbols existed. The crescent's return might signal when to begin preparing fields, when to expect a flood, or when to gather certain plants. These early uses of the lunar cycle as a guide for seasonal activities planted the seeds of something much larger. The understanding that time flowed in repeating cycles. And with that understanding came the sense that life itself could be divided into segments, each repeating in a predictable order. This was the beginning of humanity's grasp of time as an organized structure. Across the landscape of Mesopotamia, where some of the world's earliest cities formed, the horizons were wide and open. This gave the moon a dramatic stage. People could stand outside their homes and watch the first crescent appear above flat plains and distant mountains, sometimes shimmering over water, other times rising above dry earth. Each return looked familiar yet unique, shaped by shifting weather and the subtle changes of the season. The evening air might bring a cool breeze or a lingering warmth, but the crescent's arrival always carried a sense of renewal. As these communities expanded, the leaders, priests and astronomers who guided them began to formalize the moon's cycle into a system. They realized that the first crescent, the growing light, the full moon, the fading glow and the dark period all followed a pattern that could be tracked without fail. This pattern allowed them to measure longer stretches of time. A series of crescents could mark the passing of a month. A collection of months could mark the arrival of a season. A full cycle of seasons could mark a year. And at the centre of all this measurement was the belief that the moon's god, Nanna, was deliberately governing the pace of existence. There was something deeply satisfying about the moon's reliability. Even when storms obscured the sky for days, people knew the cycle remained intact. Clouds might block their view, but the heavenly rhythm continued above them, untouched by the temporary interference of weather. This reinforced the idea that celestial cycles existed beyond human influence. They were stable, unchanging, universal. In a world where floods, droughts, and shifting political power could alter daily life without warning, the steady behaviour of the moon became an anchor. One of the most striking aspects of the moon's early significance was its emotional impact. People didn't only observe it with scientific curiosity. They felt something when the crescent reappeared. A sense of comfort, a sense of continuity, a sense that the world was part of something larger. This emotional response likely contributed to the formation of myths around Nanna. A god who delivered such dependable signs was naturally considered a guardian of the order. If he governed the moon, and the moon governed time, then Nanna governed the rhythm of life itself. The reappearance of the crescent after nights of darkness may have also carried symbolic meaning. Darkness often represented uncertainty, danger, or the unknown. When the moon vanished completely near the end of its cycle, people felt the absence. The nights were darker, navigation became harder, predator activity might increase, people stayed closer to fires or shelters. But when the first sliver of moon reappeared, it felt like relief, a promise that the night was returning to its usual balance. This gradual return of light may have formed the foundation of stories about Nanna's reliability and compassion toward humanity. As societies developed writing, the moon's role became even more pronounced. Early scribes recorded lunar phases with tremendous precision. They documented when the first crescent appeared and how long it took to reach fullness. They noted any irregularities, though true irregularities were rare. Over time, these records became the basis for calendars that guided everything from religious rituals to agricultural planning. The moon's cycle shaped festivals, ceremonies, and governance. Leaders could time their decisions to align with auspicious phases. Travellers could plan long journeys to coincide with brighter nights. Farmers could anticipate the proper moment for planting, harvesting, and irrigation. In this sense, the first crescent wasn't just a symbol of renewal. It was a practical tool woven into the fabric of daily life. The connection between Nanna and fate grew stronger as the study of the moon became more sophisticated. Ancient astronomers believed that the moon's behaviour reflected the will of the gods. If the crescent appeared slightly off schedule or in an unusual position, it might signify a major event on the horizon. Priests interpreted these signs with great care. They compared current observations with records from previous generations, looking for patterns that could reveal the future. Fate, in their understanding, wasn't entirely fixed. It could be interpreted, anticipated, and sometimes even influenced through rituals or offerings. But the foundation of fate was always the moon's cycle, which provided a structure for interpreting divine intention. This idea that fate could be read through the moon gave Nanna enormous authority. He wasn't merely a celestial figure. He became one of the most important gods for guiding decisions that shaped entire communities. Leaders sought his guidance before declaring wars, launching building projects, or forming alliances. Families looked to his phases when choosing dates for weddings, funerals, or other life events. The moon's slow rise and fall acted like a silent advisor, offering signals for those who knew how to read them. One thing that made the moon especially valuable to early observers was its visibility from nearly all corners of the world. Unlike some celestial phenomena that appeared rarely or only in certain regions, the moon's cycle was universal. Its phases were the same for villages separated by mountains, rivers, deserts, or forests. This universality gave ancient societies a shared reference point. They might disagree about politics, territory, or beliefs, but they all witnessed the same unfolding of the lunar cycle. In this way, the moon became an early unifying symbol for humanity, even when people were unaware of one another's existence. The earliest moments in the cycle, when the crescent first rose after darkness, carried a quiet drama. People often gathered at specific locations, hilltops, open fields, temple terraces, to watch for the return of the moon. These gatherings were not formal at first. They were practical, rooted in the need to track time accurately. But over generations they evolved into rituals. Communities began to welcome the crescent with offerings, songs, or simple moments of recognition. As these traditions strengthened, they reinforced the belief that Nanna was not only governing celestial cycles, but was responding to human acknowledgement. The relationship became reciprocal. People watched the sky for guidance, and in return they honoured the god who provided it. In the temples devoted to Nanna, priests maintained an unbroken line of lunar records that extended across centuries. These records became some of the earliest scientific documents in human history. They tracked the timing of moon phases with astonishing precision, capturing patterns that allowed them to predict eclipses, seasonal shifts, and the length of months. This careful observation wasn't only about practical needs, it was also a way of showing devotion. To record the moon's behaviour faithfully was to honour the god who controlled it. The more accurately they documented his signs, the closer they believed they came to understanding his intentions. Over time, the first crescent gained symbolic meaning beyond its literal appearance. It became associated with beginnings, opportunities, and intentions taking shape. People used it to mark the start of new projects or personal commitments. Just as the tiny sliver of light would grow into fullness, so too could small efforts develop into larger achievements. The waning crescent, on the other hand, was associated with release, endings, and the completion of cycles. These symbolic associations gradually fused with daily life, influencing decisions and shaping cultural values. The early rise of the crescent also influenced architecture. Temples, walls, and ceremonial platforms were oriented towards specific points on the horizon where the moon appeared during important phases. Builders aligned structures with remarkable precision, ensuring that moonlight would shine into certain rooms, halls, or courtyards during significant moments of the cycle. The entrance of a small sliver of light into these spaces created a controlled experience that reinforced the moon's sacred role. People might stand inside a darkened room, waiting until the first faint line of moonlight appeared through an opening crafted with careful engineering. When it did, the effect must have been powerful, not only visually but emotionally, connecting the physical world with the celestial one. There is something grounding about the idea that such a slim shape, a single crescent of light, played a central role in the structure of ancient life. It reminds us that people looked for meaning not in overwhelming displays, but in subtle, consistent signs. The crescent was small, but its predictability made it mighty. Its return assured people that time had not lost its balance. Its cycle let them measure the world in a way that felt natural and humane, and its gentle presence allowed them to build a sense of stability that would carry their civilizations into greater complexity. The first light on the crescent sky became more than an astronomical event. It was the foundation of calendars, rituals, architecture, agriculture, navigation, divination, and collective identity. It was the earliest teacher of time, the first visible symbol of fate, and the embodiment of a god whose influence touched every aspect of life. Through that delicate arc of light, people began to understand not only the world around them, but their own place within its unfolding cycles. And as we move forward into the next part of Nanna's story, the moon's gentle rise continues to guide us through the ancient world, showing how a single returning shape became the centre of a belief system that shaped generations and still lingers quietly in the rhythms of our own lives today. From the earliest moments when ancient people looked toward the sky for meaning, they imagined that the moon did not simply appear on its own. Something must have given rise to it. Something must have placed its silver glow in motion. Something must have woven that calm presence into the fabric of night. Stories began to grow around this idea long before writing existed, and as these stories travelled across generations, shaped slowly by memory and ritual, they formed the foundation of one of the most enduring figures in Mesopotamian belief. Nanna, whose light measured the pace of the world, was not just a celestial phenomenon. He had a beginning, a lineage, a purpose given by forces older than the lunar glow itself. In the earliest descriptions passed down on clay tablets, Nanna was understood as the son of Enlil, the great ruler of wind, air, and the unseen forces that moved across the world. Enlil's presence was never quiet. His power shaped storms, commanded destinies, and guided the rise and fall of kingdoms. To be born from such a figure carried immense significance. The moon's light, soft as it seemed, had its roots in a god whose authority touched every aspect of existence. Yet Nanna did not inherit his father's tempestuous nature. Instead, he became known for something different, something steadier and less forceful. Where Enlil's presence could shift climates and determine the outcome of wars, Nanna's influence unfolded in patterns measured not in sudden events, but in patient cycles. The idea of a god being born was not taken lightly by ancient people. Birth stories were not simply accounts of beginnings. They explained why a deity held certain powers, why they interacted with the world in specific ways, and how their presence fit into the grand order of creation. For Nanna, his birth represented the introduction of order into the night. Before him, the darkness may have felt endless, unpredictable, and unfixed. The arrival of the moon, tied to his origin, marked a new kind of understanding, one where time could be measured even when the sun had disappeared, and where fate could be traced through phases of light and shadow. the myths describe that Nanna's mother, Ninlil, played an equally important role in his origin. Ninlil was associated with fresh air, grain fields, fertility, and the gentle aspects of nature that sustained daily life. Her presence balanced Enlil's more forceful authority. The union between them represented a merging of strength and sustenance, power and nourishment, command and continuity. This balance helped shape Nanna's identity. He inherited the ordered authority of Enlil, but also the nurturing steadiness of Ninlil. Together, these qualities formed a god whose influence reached into every corner of human experience without domination or fear. The story of Nanna's birth often focused on movement, wind, breath, and the first stirring of light in darkness. These ideas reflected how early observers understood the moon's emergence. It didn't burst into the sky with force. It grew naturally, almost imperceptibly, from nothing into something recognizable. A thin sliver first, then a growing arc, then a steady glow. This gradual appearance felt more like a rising breath than a dramatic creation, which made the story of Nanna's origin feel grounded in the quiet reality people saw each night. The myths used these gentle movements to explain how the moon seemed to drift across the sky with ease, never straining, never forcing its presence, always keeping the same unhurried pace. To ancient people, the moon's birthplace existed not in a distant physical location, but within the interplay of divine forces that governed the world. Enlil's position among the gods made him one of the primary architects of reality. If he gave rise to the moon through Nanna, then the moon's journey across the heavens was not an accidental phenomenon, but a deliberate act within a larger structure. This made every phase significant, every disappearance meaningful, every return reassuring. People saw the moon's cycle as a reflection of divine intention. When Nanna rose, they believed he was fulfilling his role, stepping into the sky as part of a lineage that supported the rhythm of life. In the earlier stories, Nanna's birth was followed by descriptions of his connection to the night winds. These winds were not violent or unpredictable. They drifted gently across fields, stirred the edges of rivers, and cooled the evening air. They carried scents of soil, water, and distant plants. They whispered across quiet settlements where families closed their doors and waited for dawn. These winds became associated with Nanna because they moved the way his light did, softly, steadily, calmly. People believed he guided these winds, shaping how they brushed across the land. The winds became messengers of the moon god, drifting through silence with fragments of divine presence. The idea that Nanna kept watch over the night winds offered a sense of comfort. When people heard the breeze stirring outside their homes, they did not imagine danger. They imagined a god moving through the darkness, maintaining balance, keeping the world steady during the hours when the sun was gone. This belief reinforced Nanna's identity as a caretaker of time and fate. The night winds moved in their own rhythm, but they belonged to him, and through them he shaped how nights unfolded, some cool and peaceful, some carrying signs that change would soon arrive, some heavy with expectations of new seasons. The night itself was an important part of Nanna's story. In ancient Mesopotamia, nighttime carried different meaning than it does today. Without artificial light, the world became still and vulnerable. People stayed close to hearths, listening to sounds they couldn't always identify. Animals moved in ways humans could not see. Distant fires flickered. The boundaries of safety felt closer than during the day. And despite this vulnerability, the moon provided a sense of presence. It wasn't bright enough to erase darkness, but it created a space between complete obscurity and overwhelming clarity. That space held mystery, but also comfort. Nanna's origin stories captured this balance. He did not chase darkness away, but he softened it. When ancient people imagined the gods, they often gave them families, not as literal genealogies, but as structures that explained how different forces in the world interacted. For Nanna, being the son of Enlil placed him within the highest ranks of celestial authority. It meant that his role was not a small one. It connected him to the oldest powers of the cosmos. It gave him influence over cycles that shaped existence, and it elevated his presence from a simple light in the sky to a being who governed the unfolding of events across generations. Yet for all this divine authority, Nanna's role remained distinctly gentle. The moon's glow did not bring fear or destruction. It brought continuity. It reflected consistency. In a world where storms could sweep away entire fields and rivers could flood without warning, the moon's cycle remained unbroken. Something about this calm persistence resonated deeply in the hearts of early societies. They saw in Nanna a god who offered predictability in a world that often felt chaotic. They trusted that every disappearance would be followed by a return. They believed that every phase had meaning, even if they didn't always understand it fully. The night winds connected Nanna's influence directly to the physical world. They reminded people of his presence even when clouds hid the moon. If the wind moved gently through the darkness, they sensed him near. If the wind shifted direction or changed tone, they interpreted it as a sign. Sometimes it meant new weather patterns. Sometimes it signalled the arrival of a different season. Sometimes it carried messages that priests interpreted through ritual. But always, it was tied to the moon god whose birth introduced new rhythms into human understanding. The winds also reinforced the idea that Nanna didn't simply occupy the sky. His presence extended across the land. He touched the world physically, not just visually. People felt his influence on their skin, heard it rustling through leaves, and sensed it in the coolness of night air. These gentle encounters made the moon god seem close, approachable, and connected to everyday life in a way few other gods were. His sphere of influence wasn't confined to distant heavens. It moved among people quietly, almost intimately, shaping their experience of nighttime in countless small ways. The story of his birth eventually intertwined with interpretations of fate. Because time was measured by the moon's cycle, and because Nanna's origin connected him directly to these patterns, fate became associated with his nature. Fate wasn't a sudden decree issued without warning. It unfolded gradually, phase by phase, through cycles that repeated with reliable precision. People believed that destiny could be read not in sudden thunderstorms or unpredictable storms, but in the slow returning movement of the moon and the winds he governed. Priests who served Nanna understood his birth story as part of a larger cosmic structure. The relationships between gods mirrored the relationships between celestial bodies. If Enlil represented the distant, powerful forces that shaped the world, Nanna represented the measured rhythms that humans could observe and understand. This made him a bridge between the divine realm and the human one. His birth explained why time felt both divine and accessible, why fate felt both predetermined and readable, why the moon's glow felt both cosmic and familiar. As the myths continued to develop, Nanna's lineage extended further. He eventually became the father of important deities such as Utu, the sun god, and Inanna, the goddess of love, power, and transformation. This lineage created an elegant structure within the pantheon. The moon gave rise to the sun, and the sun gave rise to the day's order. The moon gave rise to Inanna, whose shifting roles mirrored the moon's many phases. Time, destiny, emotion, cycle, transformation, all emerged from the quiet glow that first appeared in the night sky. The birth of Nanna wasn't told as a dramatic event filled with chaos or conflict. It was described with the same steadiness that defined his presence, a birth that brought order, a god who rose quietly, a presence that strengthened with time. This slow, patient unfolding reflected the moon itself. The stories were built around natural rhythms, not sudden disruption. In that sense, Nanna's origin felt deeply connected to the world people lived in. They didn't witness explosive beginnings. They witnessed slow shifts in light, the cooling of air, the stirring of winds, and the return of something familiar after absence. People likely imagined his birth while watching the horizon in the evening, seeing the moon appear where it had been missing. That moment carried a sense of arrival, not of birth in a physical sense, but of emergence, It felt like the world was taking a breath after holding it for several nights. The crescent's appearance marked the start of something new, and in that moment, every generation that looked up found a reason to tell the story again. The birth of Nanna represents not just the introduction of a god, but the birth of the world's first reliable measurement of time. It represents the emergence of a presence that shaped how people thought, planned, lived, and understood themselves. It represents the beginning of structured fate, where destiny wasn't a wild force but a cycle with signs that could be read. It represents the merging of cosmic power and gentle steadiness, creating a god who influenced the world not through thunder or command, but through rhythm. And as the story continues to unfold, the calm presence of the moon god grows into a guiding force that shaped the earliest civilizations, carried across generations by the same soft light that once swept across the horizon and announced his arrival to a waiting world. The image of a slender silver vessel drifting across the night sky is one of the oldest and most enduring symbols tied to the moon god. Long before anyone wrote his name in clay, people gazing upward imagined the crescent as something crafted, something purposeful, something shaped rather than accidental. The thin curve leaning gently toward darkness looked enough like the edge of a boat that the idea came naturally. As the moon moved across the heavens, the shape gave the impression of a vessel gliding slowly over an endless sea of stars, and from this shape grew the belief that Nanna travelled each night in a shining craft, steering his way across the sky with a calm steadiness that matched the soft curves of moonlight. To early observers, the night sky didn't feel distant, the way it does for us today. Without the blur of city lights or the glow of screens, the heavens stretched wide, sharp and close. The stars settled overhead in patterns that seemed stable and familiar, while the moon traced a path that never wavered from its rhythm. In this spacious, unbroken darkness, the moon looked like an object you could almost touch if you climbed high enough. Its movement felt slow and deliberate, as though guided by a hand behind the scenes. When the crescent leaned on its side, people saw the silhouette of a curved hull. When it brightened, they imagined it reflecting divine workmanship. The night itself became a kind of ocean, and the moon became a traveller crossing it. These early interpretations weren't far from how people understood gods in general. Divine beings didn't simply appear. They travelled, they moved, they visited, they left, they returned. The boat became a natural extension of this worldview. If the gods had realms beyond the visible world, they would need a way to come and go. A boat that sailed through darkness made as much sense as anything else. And so the crescent became not just a phase of the moon, but the vessel of Nanna, a silver craft glowing with quiet authority, carrying the deity whose light set the rhythm for life on Earth. As myths developed across Mesopotamia, the boat gained importance. It wasn't depicted as a tiny rowboat or a massive ship. It didn't need sails or oars. It was something luminous, something crafted from the very essence of moonlight. Its material wasn't described in earthly terms, because no earthly material could account for its glow. It was simply known as the Silver Boat, a vessel that carried Nanna through the sky from dusk until dawn. The boat became a symbol woven into rituals, carvings, and temple iconography. Even without full moons or clear skies, people carried the shape of the crescent inside their minds, knowing it represented movement. The idea of the moon as a boat also carried practical meaning. People who relied on rivers for travel saw how boats moved across water with a smoothness that mirrored the moon's glide. The Tigris and Euphrates shaped life across Mesopotamia. Boats carried goods, crops, people, stories, and entire economies. Watching a vessel drift along the current created a familiar sensation. Quiet, steady, rhythmic, guided by someone with skill and purpose. The moon's movement across the sky produced the same feeling on a larger scale, and the comparison strengthened naturally. Just as human boats travelled the life-giving waters of Earth, Nanna's boat travelled the life-shaping waters of the heavens. And just as earthly boats could be used for trade, communication or travel, Nanna's heavenly craft carried more than the god himself. It symbolised the movement of time. Each night as the moon crossed the sky, people marked the phases of its journey. The silver boat moved day by day, night by night, and its slow progress became a way to understand the order of weeks and months. When the crescent first appeared, it was often vertical, like a narrow hull barely rising from the horizon. As days passed, it tilted, brightened, thickened, and moved across the sky. Each shift marked progress for the boat. Each shift marked progress for the people watching below. Time didn't rush. It drifted, carried by Nanna's steady navigation. In some stories, Nanna guided the boat through regions that lay between the world of the gods and the world of humans. The night sky wasn't seen as empty space. It was a boundary, a passageway where deities moved between realms. The silver boat helped Nanna maintain this connection, ensuring that the divine remained in contact with those who lived beneath its glow. When the moon grew full, the boat appeared to widen, spreading light across the land. When it waned, it seemed to narrow, as though returning from a long journey. This motion reflected the cycle of presence and absence, engagement and retreat, always following the same sequence. One of the most significant roles of the silver boat was the delivery of messages. Priests believed that Nanna's journey carried information from the heavens to earth. These messages were not spoken. They were encoded in the moon's appearance, its brightness, its colour, its position, and its phases. People believed that Nanna brought knowledge from distant realms, knowledge that helped guide decisions in cities and fields. The boat became a symbol of transmission, the conduit through which divine meaning reached human understanding. When the moon was low on the horizon, sometimes it glowed in hues of red or orange. Early peoples interpreted these colours as signs that the journey had been long, or that events were unfolding in the heavens. When the moon rose high and clear, they believed the passage was smooth and the messages favourable. As the boat crossed the sky, priests recorded its behaviour with precision, comparing it to records kept by their predecessors. They believed these patterns were not random but intentional, part of a language spoken through celestial movement. The silver boat also represented renewal. Each month, it disappeared completely from view. The night sky became empty in the place where people expected to see it. This absence could be unsettling. Without the silver boat, the connection between earth and the heavens felt momentarily severed. But people trusted that it would return. And when it did, when the first thin edge of moonlight emerged, it felt like a reappearance after a long voyage. The boat had completed its passage and returned to begin another. This predictable cycle shaped the earliest rituals associated with beginnings, resolutions, and new periods of growth. The boat's reappearance wasn't just an astronomical event, it was a signal that life was moving forward. In certain regions, the crescent shape was drawn on clay tablets, as if it were the prow of a vessel, cutting through the sky like a ship cutting through water. These carvings often showed the boat rising above mountains or drifting over landscapes. They demonstrated how deeply the image had settled into the minds of ancient people. The boat became a visual reminder that the heavens were not fixed or silent. They were active, alive, and connected to the world below. Temples dedicated to Nanna sometimes included architectural elements that aligned with lunar phases. When the crescent first appeared, its light might slip through a narrow opening in the structure, shining onto a specific altar or wall. This light was seen as the moment when the silver boat re-entered the visible sky. Priests used these moments to begin ceremonies that had been planned for weeks. The building and the sky worked together to create an experience where people felt the divine touching the earthly world through a beam of moonlight. The notion that the moon was a boat also shaped how people understood travel after death. If the gods moved across the heavens in vessels of light, then perhaps souls could do the same. Some burial practices included symbols of boats, not because the bodies would physically travel across water, but because the imagery represented the soul's journey across realms. The crescent boat became a metaphor for transition, guidance, and safe passage. Nanna's steady navigation meant he was trusted to carry the spirits of the departed into places beyond earthly limits. His boat wasn't only a means of travel for himself, it was a symbol of how all movement between worlds occurred. The night winds that belonged to Nanna played a role in this belief. People imagined these winds filling the space around the silver boat, helping to carry it smoothly across the heavens. The winds didn't serve as literal propulsion, but they created the sense of movement that matched the moon's quiet glide. Because the winds brushed against Earth as well, they provided a connection. People could feel the same presence that guided the moon's boat touching their own world through every breeze that drifted across fields or stirred the edges of quiet rivers. The silver boat also shaped how ancient people interpreted the horizon. The moon's rise felt like a moment of emerging from below the world, as though the boat had been resting beneath the earth, or travelling through realms unseen. The horizon became the boundary between the known and the mysterious. Watching the boat rise above that line each month reinforced the idea that Nanna moved between dimensions. The horizon wasn't simply a place where the sky touched the land. It was a gateway through which divine presence passed again and again. This imagery didn't vanish when full moons dominated the sky. Even when the moon was round and bright, people still understood that the boat existed. It was simply full, its shape expanded. The idea of the boat remained consistent because it wasn't tied only to the crescent's appearance. It was tied to the movement of the moon itself. The vessel shifted shape according to the phase, but its function remained the same, carrying Nanna across the heavens to mark time, to reveal fate, and to maintain the connection between gods and humans. As cultures evolved around Mesopotamia, the silver boat found its way into stories, artwork, and ritual practices. The image spread across cities and temples carried by travellers along trade routes. Even people who didn't worship Nanna directly became familiar with the crescent boat. It appeared on seals, pottery and carvings far beyond the region where the moon god held the greatest authority. The idea resonated because the moon resonated. People everywhere recognized its movement, its cycles, and its reliability. The boat offered a way to explain that movement without reducing it to something mundane. It transformed the moon's presence into a journey. The slow drift of the silver boat across the night sky gave people a sense of orientation. Even when clouds covered the moon, they could predict its movement based on the previous nights. The boat's path became a reference point for navigation. Travellers used it to measure direction. Farmers used it to time planting. Priests used it to schedule ceremonies. Families used it to structure their days, weeks, and months. The boat guided the world because Nanna guided the boat. In the stories passed through generations, Nanna didn't steer the vessel with effort. He didn't force the moon along its path. He simply guided it. The movement was natural, smooth, and constant. This reflected the character attributed to him. He was not a god of extremes. He embodied moderation, regularity, and calm authority. The silver boat was not a vehicle for dramatic events. It was a symbol of continuity. People trusted that whenever the moon returned, Nanna had completed another journey. And with each return came the reassurance that the world remained in balance, that the cycles continued, that fate was unfolding exactly as it should. The boat didn't need ornaments, elaborate decorations, or grand displays. Its power was in its consistency. Its influence lay in the fact that it always returned. The silver boat that sailed across heaven became one of the defining symbols of Nanna, carrying his presence across the sky every night. It linked him to the movement of time, the breath of the night winds, and the structure of fate. It guided the earliest calendars, shaped rituals, and helped civilizations organize their lives. And as we drift forward into the next part of this story, That quiet boat continues to guide us deeper into the world shaped by the moon god, whose light never rushed, never faltered, and always returned to illuminate the path ahead. From the earliest nights when people gathered beneath the open sky, time did not feel like something measured or counted. It simply happened. Days followed nights, seasons shifted gradually, lives unfolded quietly with no clear markers except the practical rhythms of nature. But as people began looking upward more consistently, watching the moon take shape, grow and retreat, something changed in how they understood the movement of existence. The cycle of the moon offered them a way to see time not as a loose, drifting experience, but as something that returned, repeated, and carried a recognizable pattern. Through the slow rise and fall of Nanna's light, time gained a structure. It wasn't a straight path stretching forward endlessly. It moved in circles, repeating itself with such consistency that even the earliest observers could learn to follow its steps. For many generations before writing, this recognition must have arrived slowly. People noticed the first reappearance of the crescent after several nights of darkness. They saw it brighten until it reached fullness, then watched it fade again. They saw this pattern repeat with regularity that nothing else in their world could match. Rainfall varied. Winds shifted. The behaviours of animals changed with unpredictable moods. But the moon followed a rhythm that never broke its sequence. Even when clouds hid it, memory preserved the cycle. This reliability allowed early people to sense that time itself had a rhythm far more dependable than the shifting of daylight alone. As communities grew, this recognition deepened into something more formal. The first timekeepers weren't clocks or carved markers. They were careful observers who remembered when the crescent first appeared and who taught others to wait for that moment. These early custodians of time may have been elders, storytellers, or individuals who naturally kept track of patterns. Their role wasn't official, but it was essential. They noted when weeks had passed. They recognized when a full moon was late or early. They tracked the disappearance of the light and prepared for its return. With each observation, people came to understand that time did not drift forward without form. It looped. It returned. It repeated. And through its repetition, it revealed a structure that could be trusted. This was the beginning of circular time, a concept deeply tied to Nanna not only as the god of the moon, but as the one who governed the cycles that shaped life. The moon's cycle became the earliest calendar because it didn't demand special knowledge or complex tools. Anyone could look up and see its shape. Anyone could track its movement. Even a child could watch the light grow and understand that it would eventually shrink again. This accessibility made lunar time a shared experience. People didn't need to gather around one device or depend on a single authority. They simply needed to look at the sky. Because of this, time became something communal. It belonged to everyone, from farmers in the fields to travellers crossing riverbanks at night. As the cycles continued, people began linking lunar phases to the behaviours of their world. They noticed that certain plants responded more strongly to one part of the lunar cycle than another. The tides rose and fell in ways that echoed the moon's rhythm. Hunting patterns, migrations, and even human energy seemed to shift with the waxing and waning of the light. People began to associate these natural changes with the movements of Nanna's glow. The moon became a clock that didn't count seconds or minutes. It measured shifts in the world's larger rhythm. This was the moment when time stopped feeling like an undefined backdrop and started becoming a tool for understanding. Instead of waiting for events to occur without expectation, people could anticipate them. They learned that cycles of light were connected to cycles of life. This understanding shaped how they planted crops, how they organized storage for food, how they prepared for seasonal transitions, and how they coordinated activities between families and settlements. Time became something that could be used, not just endured. In temples built for Nanna, the circular nature of time became a central principle. Priests recorded the moon cycle with remarkable precision. Each phase carried weight. Each return of the crescent signalled a new beginning of the loop. Because their records extended across many generations, they could compare the present with the past, understanding not only the moon's cycle, but the rhythm of events tied to it. These records moved beyond practical uses into the spiritual realm. They became a way to read fate. If time walked in circles rather than in lines, then events could be interpreted as part of a repeating pattern. People believed that by studying the moon's cycle, they could understand when certain moments were likely to recur. Not identical repetitions, but echoes of earlier happenings. This belief formed the foundation of early divination practices. The moon didn't simply measure time, it revealed the structure behind both earthly and divine events. Nanna became more than a celestial figure. He became the guide who showed humanity how fate unfolded. Circular time also reshaped how people understood beginnings and endings. An ending wasn't abrupt. It led naturally into another beginning. When the moon disappeared, people didn't treat the darkness as a conclusion. They waited patiently, knowing the crescent would return. When seasons changed, they didn't grieve the passing of one and welcome another with surprise. They recognized the cycle within the progression. Time's circular nature became part of how people viewed life itself. Birth, maturity, decline, and renewal formed loops just like the moon's phases. This influenced rituals, stories, and even the way families remembered their ancestors. The structure of circular time extended beyond the physical world into the divine hierarchy. Gods who governed elements such as wind, fertility, sunlight, and justice were understood through cycles of influence. They had patterns too, even in myth. Nanna's cycle was the most visible, the most consistent, and the most widely observed. His role was to reveal a cosmic truth, that the world wasn't a straight path moving endlessly forward. It moved like a wheel, returning again and again to similar points, each time with slightly different circumstances. The circular movement of time created a calming effect in early societies. People didn't fear the unknown as intensely when they understood that the world repeated itself. Hardships would pass, as they always had. Abundance would return, as it always did. Even the cycle of human life gained purpose through this understanding. The idea that time repeated allowed communities to plan their futures with confidence. It also helped them preserve their pasts. Traditions passed down through generations remained relevant because the cycles continued. Knowledge didn't lose value, it gained strength through repetition. Priests who dedicated their lives to studying lunar cycles developed complex systems for interpreting the meaning of time's circular nature. They recognized subtle changes in the moon's appearance, such as shifts in its color or slight variations in its path. These small details were seen as signs that the cycle carried messages. When something unexpected happened, an eclipse, an unusually faint crescent, people believed that the circle of time was speaking. They didn't view these moments as random occurrences. They treated them as hints that fate was shifting. And because Nanna governed these signs, he became one of the most important gods for interpreting the future. Circular time influenced laws, ceremonies, and daily routines. Leaders scheduled important political decisions during specific phases of the moon. Agricultural activities were coordinated based on lunar cycles. Families chose certain phases for celebrations or transitions. Cities marked their rituals by the appearance of the crescent. This wasn't a matter of superstition. It was a reflection of how deeply circular time had woven itself into the structure of civilization. When the moon reached fullness, or when the new crescent appeared, the world felt aligned, balanced, and connected. As cities grew and writing developed, the concept of circular time became even more refined. Scholars used tablets to record overlapping cycles that extended beyond the moon. They linked lunar months to the behavior of planets, the timing of floods, and the shifting length of days. They discovered that cycles nested inside other cycles. Time didn't just walk in circles, it walked in circles within circles. These larger patterns guided the long-term planning of entire societies, including construction of temples, distribution of resources, and preparation for rare astronomical events. At the centre of all these cycles stood Nanna. His presence provided the most visible and dependable pattern in the sky. People didn't need to understand every complexity of astronomical systems. They simply needed to watch the moon's familiar phases. Through this simple observation, they entered into the rhythm of circular time without needing advanced knowledge. Nanna's cycle became the teacher of everyone: children, elders, leaders, labourers, priests. Anyone could follow it. Anyone could understand it. And because of that, time belonged to everyone. The idea that time walked in circles also shaped how people perceived destiny. If events repeated, then fate wasn't fixed in a single direction. It unfolded gradually, step by step, through cycles that returned to similar positions. This allowed people to interpret fate without feeling trapped by it. They believed that careful observation, ritual practice, and attention to the lunar cycle could help them navigate destiny more skillfully. Fate wasn't a sudden decree. It was a pattern, and patterns could be followed. Circular time also influenced architecture. Builders aligned structures with the path of the moon, designing temples that captured specific phases of light. Each month, moonlight would enter through particular openings, illuminating altars or inscriptions. These moments weren't accidents. They were carefully timed events that reflected the cycle of time. The architecture became part of the rhythm, reinforcing the idea that human structures and celestial patterns were connected. As the concept of circular time deepened within society, it shaped how people understood memory. Memories weren't isolated fragments. They were part of cycles too. People believed that important events echoed across time, reappearing in different forms. Stories passed down through families gained significance because they were connected to cycles that would repeat. People didn't cling to the past out of nostalgia. They preserved it because they believed its patterns would return, offering guidance for future generations. The cycle also shaped how people understood renewal. Just as the moon returned after darkness, people believed that periods of hardship would eventually bring periods of flourishing. This idea brought emotional stability. In a world where droughts, conflicts, and uncertainty could disrupt daily life, the cycle offered reassurance. People pointed to the moon as proof that life was not a series of random events. It was an unfolding sequence that always returned to balance. Time learning to walk in circles didn't happen suddenly. It emerged slowly through countless nights of observation, through generations who watched the same sky their ancestors had watched. As the moon carried itself across heaven in its silver boat, it taught humanity how to measure days, how to interpret seasons, and how to understand the flow of existence. Nanna's influence lay not only in the glow of his light, but in the rhythm of his movement, a rhythm that shaped the very structure of civilization. And as we follow this story further, that steady circular motion continues guiding our path, just as it once guided those who first looked upward and realized that time itself was not drifting without direction, but moving with a gentle, repeating purpose that carried the world from one moment into the next. Across the long expanse of early Mesopotamia, where cities rose from riverbanks and the night sky carried more meaning than any written page, there stood structures that shaped how people understood destiny. These were the temples dedicated to the moon god, places built not only from clay and stone, but from the belief that the heavens communicated through light, shadow, and the slow rhythm of celestial movement. Among all the temples that dotted the early world, few held as much significance as those raised in honour of Nanna. They weren't simply places of worship. They were centres of knowledge, archives of time, and the earliest institutions where fate was recorded with careful attention. The most renowned of these temples stood in the ancient city of a place that rose as a hub of culture, trade, and ritual along the banks of the Euphrates. From a distance, the great ziggurat of looked like a layered mountain constructed by human hands, its stepped form reaching upward in broad ascending levels. At its top, high above the city's noise and the smell of river mud, stood the sacred chamber where priests observed the night sky without obstruction. This height wasn't only symbolic, it provided a clear view of the horizon, a vantage point essential for tracking the moon's movements. Every rise, every shift, every subtle change in brightness could be recorded with precision from that elevated sanctuary. People understood that Nanna chose high places for his presence. The elevated chamber mirrored the moon's path across the heavens. The soft glow of moonlight often reached the platform, illuminating its walls and floors in a way that made the space feel connected to the sky rather than the earth. Those who climbed the long stairways leading upward did so with the awareness that each step brought them closer to the realm where divine patterns were observed. No matter how many times the priest climbed those steps, they felt the weight of the moment each night. They weren't simply performing a task, they were maintaining a connection that lay at the center of their civilization. Inside the temple complexes, the atmosphere was quiet. Even during the day, when the city below bustled with trade and conversation, the temple grounds remained calm. Walls rose high enough to block out the noise. Courtyards caught breezes that carried a sense of coolness. In chambers filled with clay tablets, scribes bent over their work in steady concentration. These tablets recorded everything tied to the moon cycle, its phases, its timing, its position in the sky during significant events. But the records weren't limited to astronomical observations. They included predictions, omens, interpretations, and instructions for ceremonies that needed to be performed at specific points in the cycle. The temple didn't treat the moon as a distant light. It treated it as an active presence that shaped life. People believed that fate unfolded in patterns, and those patterns became visible through Nanna's movements. This meant the temple was responsible for interpreting these movements, not only for religious purposes, but for social and political ones as well. Leaders consulted the priests before making decisions. Farmers relied on their interpretations to determine planting and harvesting cycles. Families turned to them for guidance during major life events. The temple wasn't separate from daily life. It was woven into every aspect of it. Inside the temple libraries, scribes stored tablets in rows, organized according to the lunar cycles they described. Each year filled shelves with new records, but the older ones were preserved with equal care. The priests believed the past could reveal the future, and they treated the archives as a map of repeating cycles. They compared current lunar patterns with those from generations earlier, looking for alignments or irregularities. If a crescent appeared slightly later than expected, they searched for similar occurrences in the past. If the moon seemed unusually bright or dim, they checked records for instances where such behavior preceded significant events. The moon didn't speak through words, it spoke through repetition. Through these repetitions, they believed Nanna revealed his intentions. This careful analysis turned the temples into centers of scholarship. Priests were not simply ritual specialists. They were astronomers, historians, mathematicians, and interpreters of fate. Their role demanded patience, discipline, and a deep understanding of cycles that extended far beyond simple observation. While the general population could watch the moon move across the sky, the priests understood the mathematical patterns behind that movement. They knew how long each phase would last. They understood the relationship between lunar cycles and seasonal changes. They learned to predict eclipses, which held enormous significance for the people who looked to the moon as a symbol of stability. Despite their scholarly roles, the priests didn't view their work as separate from spiritual duty. Every observation, every calculation, and every record was an act of devotion. They believed that by paying close attention to the moon's behavior, they were honoring Nanna. Their knowledge didn't feel cold or detached. It felt sacred. And this sacredness shaped the atmosphere of the temples, giving every courtyard, every chamber, and every quiet hallway a sense of purpose. The rituals performed in honor of Nanna varied depending on the phase of the moon. When the crescent first returned after days of darkness, The priests conducted ceremonies that welcomed the light back into the world. These rituals often took place at night, with small flames burning in carefully arranged lamps. Music drifted through the air, not loud or celebratory, but steady and rhythmic, reflecting the measured reappearance of the moon. Offerings were placed on altars to mark the beginning of a new cycle. These offerings weren't meant to influence the moon's behaviour. They were acknowledgements of the cycle itself, expressions of respect for the forces that governed time. During the full moon, ceremonies took on a brighter tone. The moon's abundance of light made the night feel expanded, almost extended into a different kind of day. People gathered outside the temple to catch glimpses of the glowing disk high above, while priests conducted rituals inside chambers lit naturally by the moon's reflection on polished surfaces. The temple architecture was designed to make use of this light, aligning openings and stone surfaces so that moonlight entered uninterrupted. In these moments, the presence of Nanna felt strong, not forceful, but unmistakably clear. The full moon didn't need interpretation. Its brightness alone carried meaning. The temples also played a vital role in predicting fate, not through dramatic visions or sudden revelations, but through consistent analysis. When people came seeking guidance, priests didn't offer vague prophecies. They consulted records. They examined how patterns in the moon cycle corresponded with past events. They looked at the alignment of the moon with constellations or planets. Their interpretations were grounded in observation, which made them trusted advisors in a world where understanding the future felt essential to survival. These predictions shaped everything from agricultural cycles to political strategies. A leader preparing for a major decision might visit the temple at night, guided through corridors illuminated by oil lamps, climbing stairways toward the upper platforms where the moon glowed above. There, the priests would share their interpretations based on the current phase, the timing of the cycle, and the alignment of celestial indicators. These conversations weren't hurried. They unfolded slowly, in quiet tones, grounded in the belief that fate revealed itself not in sudden insights but in patterns that had been unfolding for generations. The temple's influence extended into daily life in ways that didn't always appear spiritual. When scribes maintained calendars, they didn't do it for ritual alone. They created schedules for festivals, coordinated the rotation of labour, and maintained order within the city. The lunar calendar guided markets, trade agreements, and even tax collection. The temples, through their work with Nanna's cycle, provided structure that helped entire civilizations function smoothly. In smaller settlements, there might not have been massive ziggurats, but there were still places dedicated to the moon god. Simple shrines stood beneath open sky, built from mud bricks or stone, offering a space where people could leave offerings or observe the moon's movement. These shrines formed the local centres of timekeeping. Priests or community leaders recorded lunar phases on small tablets or marked them on walls. Even without monumental buildings, the connection to Nanna remained strong. The circular motion of time belonged to every community, whether large or small. The architecture of the moon temples also reflected an understanding of cycles and alignment. Builders oriented structures towards specific points on the horizon, where the moon rose during key phases. Doorways, windows, and staircases aligned with moonlight during particular nights. These alignments weren't decorative. They helped priests track lunar movement with precision. When the light passed through a certain opening or illuminated a particular object, it signalled a moment of significance. This blending of architecture and astronomy made the temples function as instruments for observing time. People believed that Nanna communicated through these alignments. When a beam of moonlight struck an altar at a precise moment, it felt like a message. Not a literal message, but a reminder of the order embedded in the world. The temple structure amplified the moon's presence, turning light into guidance. The experience must have felt powerful, standing in a chamber built from earth, watching moonlight move across a carved surface as predictably as the return of the seasons. It showed that the cycle was not only visible in the sky, but present within the world of stone, clay, and human construction. The temples weren't isolated from the rest of the city. Roads led toward them. Markets surrounded them. Homes stood in their shadows. People heard the sound of music from within their walls during evening ceremonies. They saw the flickering of lanterns during late-night observations. The temple wasn't a separate place where only priests belonged. It was part of daily experience, shaping the rhythm of life from the centre outward. When people walked past its walls, they were reminded of the cycles that governed their lives. When they saw the moon above the structure, they felt the presence of a god whose influence reached across generations. Nanna's temples became repositories of memory. Each tablet recorded what had happened, what had been observed, and what had been predicted. Over time, these records formed a continuous timeline stretching back farther than any one person's memory. The priests who inherited this knowledge carried the responsibility of maintaining it. They read the old tablets carefully. They corrected errors. They added new entries. The moon cycle might have been eternal, but human memory was not. The tablets preserved the connection between the present and the distant past. They ensured that the cycle was not forgotten, even when generations changed. The idea that fate was written in the moon's movement didn't mean that everything was predetermined. People believed that fate revealed its direction through patterns, but they also believed that understanding these patterns allowed them to navigate life more effectively. Fate wasn't an unchangeable decree. It was a structure that could be interpreted, understood, and approached with awareness. The moon temples provided the tools for this understanding. Inside the temples, daily rituals continued in quiet, steady repetition. Priests prepared offerings, read tablets, and observed the sky. Their routines mirrored the cycles they studied. They woke before sunrise to prepare for the disappearing moon. They climbed the ziggurat after sunset to watch for the first signs of the crescent. They didn't hurry. They didn't skip steps. Their work unfolded with the same patience that defined the moon's movement. This rhythm shaped the atmosphere of the temples, giving them a sense of calm determination. The people who lived near these temples grew up with the awareness that time was something orderly, something that could be understood through observation. Children learned to identify the moon's phases. They watched priests climb the steps each evening. They saw their parents orient activities around the lunar cycle. Even without formal education, they absorbed the understanding that time walked in circles, guided by a god whose presence was steady and unwavering. The moon temples where fate was written were more than religious institutions. They were the earliest centres of astronomy, the first libraries of recorded history, the foundations of calendars, and the quiet heartbeats of civilizations. They gave structure to cultures that depended on predictability. They provided guidance in times of uncertainty. And they maintained a connection between the human world and the celestial one through rituals and records that carried the weight of generations. And as the story of Nanna continues, these temples remained central, standing tall beneath the glow of the moon, holding the records of cycles that shaped lives and guiding the understanding of a world that found meaning, not in sudden revelations, but in the patient repetition of light across the night sky. Long before the modern world learned to measure time with gears, numbers and precise devices cold enough to sit silently on a shelf, entire civilizations depended on the patience and dedication of a small group of people who spent their lives looking upward. These were the scribes who watched the sky for signs, the quiet observers who carried the responsibility of understanding the movements of the moon and the patterns left behind by Nanna. Their work unfolded at a slow and steady pace, not in bursts of excitement or sudden discoveries, but in quiet hours spent beneath the open sky, recording the position of a glowing crescent or the subtle shift of light across the surface of the night. These scribes formed the backbone of ancient knowledge, bridging the gap between what humans could see and what they hoped to understand. Their role began in the earlier settlements, before large temples rose, and before cities became complex networks of trade and authority. People in those early communities needed someone who could remember when the moon last appeared, when it reached fullness, and when darkness returned. Memory alone held the first calendars, and the people who kept those memories safe were the first scribes. They didn't have tablets or styluses at the beginning, only their eyes and their recollection of when a certain phase had appeared in the sky. But even in those early days, they understood the value of observation. They recognized that the moon's cycle offered structure, and they became the ones who noticed when that structure shifted. As writing developed, their work became more sophisticated. Clay tablets offered a way to preserve knowledge beyond the span of one lifetime. The scribes began to document the rhythm of the moon with a precision that astonished later generations. They marked each night's observation, noting whether the crescent leaned slightly to one side or appeared thicker than expected. They recorded the time between one phase and the next, building a bank of knowledge that stretched across decades and eventually centuries. These observations formed the first body of astronomical knowledge ever recorded, and at the centre of it all was Nanna, the moon god whose presence guided their work. The scribes worked in the quiet spaces of the temples dedicated to him. Their chambers weren't bustling, crowded places filled with noise. They were calm, steady environments where the scratching of styluses against clay created a soft rhythm that carried through the halls. The smell of clay, oil, and dried reeds filled the air. Stacks of tablets lined the walls, each one containing details that shaped the understanding of time, fate, and the broader order of the world. The scribes didn't treat these records as simple data. They treated them as pieces of a larger truth, signs from the heavens that revealed how the universe moved. Their training began early. Young students joined the temples as apprentices, learning not only how to read and write, but how to watch the sky with discipline. They didn't gaze upward aimlessly. They learned specific techniques for identifying the moon's phase, tracking the angle of its rise above the horizon, and calculating how long it remained visible. They learned to distinguish natural fluctuations from meaningful shifts. They learned how the moon's brightness changed depending on the season. They became accustomed to spending long hours outside, sometimes in cold winds, sometimes under warm nights, always with the awareness that what they saw mattered to the entire community. These apprentices grew into experienced scribes who carried the weight of their responsibilities with quiet confidence. Their work didn't bring them wealth or political power, but it brought them influence in ways that mattered. Leaders consulted them, priests relied on their knowledge, farmers looked to them for guidance. Their interpretations shaped festivals, planting cycles, and the timing of trade expeditions. The entire city moved according to patterns the scribes helped define. They didn't take this lightly. Each mark they pressed into clay carried meaning. At the centre of their work was the belief that Nanna communicated through consistency. The moon didn't speak, but it offered signs through its behaviour. Scribes treated each observation as a message from the god, a reminder that time flowed with purpose. They understood that when the crescent returned after darkness, it wasn't merely an astronomical event, it was the start of a new cycle. When the full moon lit the city below, it signalled abundance. When the moon dimmed unexpectedly or appeared at an odd angle, they compared records to find whether such a pattern had occurred in the past. Nothing was viewed as meaningless. Everything carried potential significance. They developed methods for interpreting these patterns with remarkable accuracy. One of their tasks involved predicting eclipses, which held enormous meaning for the people who feared sudden changes in the moon's appearance. By studying the lunar cycles recorded across generations, scribes identified large patterns that repeated every 18 years and some months. This wasn't a simple discovery. It took patience and the ability to compare hundreds of tablets, each documenting small variations. When they finally recognized the pattern, they used it to predict future eclipses with enough confidence that communities could prepare rituals and ceremonies in advance. Their ability to predict such events impressed those who depended on their knowledge. The scribes didn't claim to control the heavens. They simply listened to the rhythm that Nanna provided. Their role was that of interpreters, not rulers. This humility shaped their approach to their work. They didn't impose meaning where none could be found. They didn't invent patterns. They waited for the signs to reveal themselves through repetition and alignment. Their patience matched the slow cycle of the moon itself. The scribes also recorded events on Earth. Floods, droughts, harvest yields, political changes, and major gatherings were often documented alongside lunar observations. They believed that the connection between the heavens and the world below was not symbolic, but direct. If a significant event happened during a particular phase, that association was noted. Over time, these connections allowed priests and scribes to interpret fate. If certain patterns repeated, they compared the present moment to similar points in the past. They interpreted this repetition as part of the cycle Nanna governed. Fate wasn't an unpredictable force. It was a sequence that revealed itself through careful observation. Their tablets became both scientific records and spiritual guides. People came to the temples with concerns about their future, concerns that range from the timing of a wedding to the best moment to begin a journey. Scribes would consult the tablets, looking for signs of favourable cycles. They interpreted with a calm, measured approach that reflected their training. They didn't rush their conclusions. They took their time, ensuring that their advice aligned with the patterns recorded across generations. Their guidance offered reassurance because it was grounded in something larger than any one person's perspective. Inside the temple chambers, the scribes developed a familiarity with the moon that bordered on intimate. They noticed small shifts most people would overlook. They recognized when the crescent appeared slightly more curved than usual. They saw when the full moon was especially bright or when its edges seemed unusually sharp. They tracked how the moon's rising point on the horizon shifted slightly throughout the year. They didn't view these details as trivial. They viewed them as essential components of a system that revealed the structure of time. Because their work required them to be awake during moonlit nights, their schedules differed from those of the people around them. While others slept, they climbed temple stairways, carrying tablets, styluses, and lamps. The night air may have been cool, but they grew accustomed to it. They listened to the quiet sound of winds moving across the temple's high platforms. They watched stars shift alongside the moon's movement. Their senses sharpened in the stillness. They weren't isolated. They were connected to everything the sky revealed. During the day, while the moon's presence was faint or hidden, the scribes worked within the temple archives. They shaped fresh clay tablets. They copied older records to preserve them. They compared current observations with ancient ones. They created charts and lists that helped priests interpret what they saw. They organized the archives in a way that allowed future generations to continue their work seamlessly. They didn't treat their records as personal achievements. They saw them as contributions to a larger body of knowledge, a lineage that extended far beyond their own lives. This work taught them patience. They understood that any single night's observation meant little without context. The moon's cycle was long, and its patterns became meaningful only through repetition. Their work reminded them constantly that understanding required time. This influence shaped their personalities. People described scribes as calm, measured individuals who didn't rush decisions. They carried the rhythm of the moon within them. Their thinking unfolded as slowly and steadily as the cycles they studied. Their role became even more significant during times of uncertainty. When political conflicts arose or when floods threatened crops, people turned to the scribes for direction. They looked for reassurance in the patterns the scribes understood. The scribes didn't offer guarantees, they offered perspective. They reminded people that cycles included both abundance and difficulty, and that both were part of the rhythm governed by Nanna. Their guidance didn't simply solve problems. It grounded communities in a larger view of existence. The scribes' status in society reflected their importance. While they didn't hold political power, they were respected as keepers of knowledge. Their presence at ceremonies, festivals, and gatherings lent authority to these events. People trusted them because their work wasn't based on emotion or impulse. It was based on years of observation and a lifelong commitment to accuracy. They represented a form of stability that mirrored the stability of the moon's cycle. Their connection to Nanna wasn't only intellectual. They believed genuinely that they served the moon god through their work. Each recorded phase was an acknowledgement of his presence. Each interpretation honoured the cyclical nature of time he governed. They didn't need dramatic signs to feel his influence. They saw it in the consistent return of the crescent, the steady movement of the silver boat across the night sky, and the reliable renewal of light after darkness. As generations passed, the scribes taught new students who continued their work. One generation's observations blended seamlessly into the next. This continuity meant that knowledge didn't fade, it accumulated. The archives expanded, the accuracy of predictions improved, the understanding of patterns deepened. The temples became repositories not only of clay tablets, but of human dedication to observing the heavens with care. These scribes helped create the foundation of astronomy, mathematics, timekeeping, and historical record. They shaped how people understood fate. They taught societies that time had structure, that cycles could be trusted, and that careful observation could reveal truths embedded in the natural world. Their work reflected the nature of the moon god they served, steady, patient, and always returning. And as the story continues, these quiet watchers of the heavens remain central, carrying the glow of Nanna's light through the long arc of generations, ensuring that the signs written across the night sky were never lost, and that the rhythm of time continued to guide the world with the same soft steadiness that marked every rise of the crescent above the horizon. In the long stretch of ancient nights when the world grew quiet beneath the steady glow of the moon, people believed that both gods and mortals undertook journeys guided by Nanna's presence. These journeys weren't defined by dramatic events or sudden revelations. They were shaped by the slow rhythm of night itself, unfolding beneath a sky that felt larger and more intimate than anything experienced during the day. When the sun retreated and the wind settled, the night opened a different kind of world, one where shadows softened, sounds carried farther, and the moon created pathways across the darkness that people trusted with a depth that can still be felt in the oldest stories left behind. For ancient societies that depended heavily on the changing seasons, the cycles of the moon weren't only tools for timekeeping. They shaped how people moved through the world. The night was often the safest time to travel long distances, especially across open plains or heated deserts where the sun's intensity could drain strength quickly. Under the silver glow of Nanna's light, travellers could see just enough of the path ahead to move with confidence. They didn't fear losing their direction because the moon's position guided them. Its rise, its angle, and its brightness all worked together to reveal a route that felt as reliable as a well-worn road. Each journey taken at night, no matter how small or large, connected people to Nanna's presence because they depended on his glow to carry them safely from one place to another. Those who travelled under the moonlight often felt that the world shifted around them. The busy sounds of daytime, markets, tools, footsteps, shouts, faded into distant echoes. What remained were the quiet rhythms of nature, the rippling of water, the brushing of wind through reeds, the voice of insects, and the occasional movement of animals emerging from their hiding places. These sounds didn't intimidate travellers. They reassured them that the world was alive and that they were not alone. Every sound blended with the glow of the moon, creating a sense of company even when walking in solitude. Travellers believed that Nanna watched over them, not in the sense of a guard standing behind them, but as an enduring presence whose steady light made the night feel navigable. Many of the night journeys undertaken by mortals weren't long pilgrimages but simple tasks essential to survival. Farmers checked irrigation channels after sundown, using the brightness of the moon to guide their steps along narrow embankments. Fishermen carried small lamps and moved toward riverbanks when the night was cool and fish were active. Shepherds guided their flocks across moonlit hills, trusting the subtle light that revealed predators and protected their animals. The moonlight softened the world but didn't obscure it. People learned to read the faint differences in shadow and shape, developing an instinctive awareness of the land that grew stronger with each night spent under Nanna's glow. Even within the cities, night opened a different kind of experience. The crowded streets that felt overwhelming during the day became calm places bathed in pale light. Families climbed to rooftops to rest in the cool air. Priests moved quietly through temple courtyards, carrying lamps that flickered beneath the moon. Watchmen patrolled the outer walls, using the moonlight to scan the horizon for approaching travellers or wandering animals. The night was never empty. It carried activity of its own, shaped by a rhythm that felt slower and more thoughtful than the hurried movements of daylight. The belief that gods also travelled under the moonlight emerged from the idea that night created a veil between realms. Daylight brought clarity and separation. The night blended boundaries. Darkness didn't erase the world. It softened it, allowing people to imagine that divine figures moved closer to the earth when shadows stretched across the land. When the moon glowed brightly, people imagined that Nanna's boat glided closer to their world, the silver vessel drifting along a darkened sea of stars. Other gods were believed to move more freely during these moments as well, using the softened boundary between realms to observe humanity or carry out tasks that didn't require the sharp boundaries of day. Stories passed down across generations described gods travelling along beams of moonlight, stepping between places that mortals would take days to cross. These journeys weren't always seen as purposeful visits. Sometimes they represented simple movement, the way mortals travelled from one settlement to another. The gods, like people, had roles that required them to move. They sought counsel, delivered messages, or kept watch over particular regions. The moonlight made these journeys possible. It created a neutral space where divine and human worlds aligned in a shared glow. People didn't imagine gods rushing through the night. They imagined them moving with the same slow steadiness that shaped the moon's path. The belief that gods used the night for travel also explained why certain rituals were performed after sunset. Offerings placed on altars, prayers spoken in quiet voices, and lamps arranged in ceremonial patterns took on greater significance when performed beneath the moon. People believed that the gods could see these acts more clearly at night, when divine movement was easier. Nanna, as the overseer of the night, became the witness of these rituals. Mortals felt a closeness to him during these hours, not because they expected a response, but because the night created an atmosphere in which connection felt natural. When people travelled in groups at night, they often shared stories tied to Nanna. These weren't tales meant to frighten or entertain. They were stories meant to remind travellers that they were part of a world guided by cycles older than memory. Stories of the silver boat drifting steadily across the sky helped people feel safe. Stories of the moon temples and the scribes who watched the heavens reminded them that their journeys were part of a larger pattern. The night felt less intimidating when it held meaning. Nanna's presence made the darkness feel like something guided, rather than something empty. Merchants moving along trade routes understood this well. Their journeys often stretched for weeks or months, carrying them far from familiar places. When they travelled by day, they relied on landmarks and the position of the sun. But at night, the moon became their guide. They watched for the crescent, noting its tilt and position. They adjusted their routes according to its angle. The moon's movement across the sky gave them a sense of orientation that remained stable even when the terrain changed. They trusted Nanna's guidance because it didn't waver, even when their paths twisted through valleys, deserts, or forests. These merchant journeys helped spread stories of Nanna to distant regions. Traders carried goods, but they also carried knowledge. They shared tales of the moon temples, the scribes, the rituals, and the belief that the moon guided both gods and mortals. These stories shaped how far-flung communities perceived the night sky. People in distant places began to observe the moon with new attention, recognizing its cycle as part of a larger pattern that connected them to others across the land. The night journeys of merchants helped extend Nanna's influence far beyond the boundaries of the cities built in his honour. There were also ceremonial journeys taken at night, where individuals or groups travelled to specific locations believed to hold significance under moonlight. These places might have been natural formations, springs, hills, or small shrines outside the main city. People didn't treat these journeys as pilgrimages meant to seek miracles. They treated them as moments of quiet connection. The walk itself, under the steady glow of the moon, through calm air, across familiar paths, became the ritual. They believed that Nanna's light illuminated their steps not only physically, but symbolically, guiding their thoughts and grounding their emotions. Some of these night journeys were taken by those seeking guidance in times of uncertainty. People facing difficult decisions sometimes left their homes after sunset and walked into the open fields, allowing the quiet night to settle their thoughts. They didn't expect direct answers from the moon. They expected clarity to come from the act of being present beneath its glow. The steady movement of Nanna's light created an environment where worries softened and decisions felt less burdensome. The night didn't erase challenges, it made them more manageable. People believed that walking beneath the moon helped align their thoughts with the rhythm of the world. There were also ancient beliefs that certain dreams were shaped by the moon. People who slept under its light or near open windows believed that Nanna's presence could influence the images seen during sleep. These dreams weren't thought of as prophetic in a dramatic sense. They were considered reflections of the cycle's influence. People interpreted them gently, looking for hints rather than commands. The moon's role in these dreams reinforced the idea that Nanna's guidance extended beyond waking life, touching the mind in subtle ways that helped shape decisions and understanding. Priests also undertook night journeys, though theirs were often practical rather than symbolic. They walked through temple courtyards, checking the alignment of shadows or confirming the position of the moon at specific points. They climbed stairways to reach observation platforms, carrying lamps that illuminated their path. They moved through quiet halls where the air felt cooler, filled with a sense of purpose that didn't require fanfare. Their journeys allowed them to maintain the accuracy of the records that shaped the understanding of fate. These nightly movements connected the priests directly to the celestial rhythm they interpreted during the day. In some traditions, people believed that Nanna himself undertook a nightly journey across the heavens, not only to mark the passage of time but to observe the events unfolding in the world below. His soft light was seen as his way of keeping watch, not with judgment, but with steady attention. The idea that a god travelled each night to observe humanity offered comfort. It meant that the world was never entirely dark. Someone was always watching over it, maintaining order through presence rather than force. People didn't imagine Nanna descending to intervene. They imagined him drifting overhead, carrying his silver boat across the sky with consistent patience. Nanna's journey also intersected with those of other gods. Stories described him meeting with celestial figures during his passage, exchanging information, offering guidance, or marking transitions in the cycles governed by each deity. These meetings weren't imagined as dramatic gatherings filled with tension. They were described as calm interactions, shaped by the slow pace of night. The gods didn't rush through these encounters. They moved with the same unhurried rhythm that defined their celestial paths. Their journeys created a sense of harmony, a reminder that the divine world operated according to cycles that kept everything connected. Mortals understood these stories not as literal accounts, but as reflections of the stability they experienced through the moon's cycles. The idea of divine journeys helped explain why the world felt balanced. If the gods themselves travelled, observed, and communicated, then the rhythms of the world weren't accidental. They were shaped by consistent movement. People found reassurance in these ideas because they matched what they saw in the sky. The stories blended naturally with observation. They didn't contradict reality. They enriched it. The night journeys of mortals and the imagined journeys of gods created a shared experience that shaped how people related to the night. They didn't fear darkness. They understood it as a time when different parts of the world came alive. The moon didn't dispel night, it revealed its structure. Nanna's guidance allowed people to move, think, rest, and connect beneath a glow that remained steady even when everything else shifted. As the generations continued, these journeys became part of the cultural memory. They shaped the stories told in homes, the rituals performed in temples, and the decisions made by leaders. The moon's presence wasn't a backdrop. It was an active force shaping the world little by little, night after night. Whether someone walked along a narrow path between fields, listened to distant winds on a quiet rooftop, or travelled far across unfamiliar terrain, the moon guided them with a calm and steady presence that reflected the nature of the god who governed it, and as this story unfolds further, that same steady glow continues to guide the world through cycles of movement, time and destiny, carrying the influence of Nanna across every journey that takes place beneath the quiet light of the night sky. When the earliest cities began shaping themselves into organised societies with markets, councils, workers, farmers, and trade routes spreading outward across the land, there was one system that held everything together, with a steadiness that no leader or wall or law could match. It was the lunar calendar, a structure built not from carved stone or written decrees, but from the slow and dependable movement of Nanna's light across the heavens. As civilizations expanded in complexity, the people living within them realized that their lives required more than memory, more than instinct, and more than informal habits passed down through families. They needed a shared rhythm that connected every household, field, workshop, temple, and gathering place, and they found that rhythm by looking up at the sky each night. The lunar calendar grew naturally from the work of the scribes and priests who had spent generations observing the moon. Their records revealed patterns that stayed consistent regardless of changes on the earth below. No matter who ruled a city or what challenges a community faced, the moon cycle continued at the same measured pace. Each phase returned precisely as expected. Each period of darkness gave way to the same thin crescent. Each full moon expanded over the same portion of the sky. It didn't matter whether the city was flourishing or struggling, the cycle remained steady. This made it the perfect foundation for a calendar that could guide entire civilizations through the complexities of daily life. The lunar calendar wasn't created with a single moment of invention. It emerged over countless years of careful observation. Scribes noted how many days passed between the return of the crescent and the next. They counted the days of the full moon's brightness. They documented the length of darkness that preceded the reappearance of light. Over time, they realized that these phases repeated with astonishing accuracy. This pattern allowed them to divide time into months, and these months became the backbone of organization for societies that relied on predictability. A month wasn't an abstract unit. It was something visible. People could step outside their homes, look upward, and see exactly where they stood within the cycle. This direct connection between the calendar and the night sky made the concept of time feel natural and grounded. Unlike modern calendars, which exist as agreed-upon constructs, the lunar calendar didn't need explanation. It reflected something everyone could observe. Time couldn't be manipulated because it belonged to the rhythm of the heavens. Each month began with the appearance of the crescent, the thin symbol of Nanna's return after the silent darkness of the invisible moon. This moment held significance beyond simple calculation. It represented renewal. Markets opened on the first days of the lunar month with traders eager to begin new cycles of exchange. Families performed small rituals soon after the return of the crescent, acknowledging the start of another period shaped by predictable rhythms. Temples held ceremonies to mark the new cycle, not in a dramatic fashion, but through steady acknowledgements that mirrored the gentle rising of the moon itself. As the month unfolded, the increasing brightness of the moon helped guide daily activities. Farmers used the growing light to work in the fields after sunset, especially during seasons when daytime heat was overwhelming. Travelling caravans coordinated their movement with the waxing moon, allowing them to cover greater distances with the safety and visibility its glow provided. People arranged celebrations, rest periods, and trade gatherings around the full moon when the night felt almost extended. It wasn't simply convenient. It felt aligned with the natural order. The full moon became one of the key markers of the calendar. Its brightness symbolized abundance and clarity. Festivals often took place during the full moon, not because it was a symbolic idea, but because the visibility allowed communities to gather safely even after sunset. Musicians played in courtyards, storytellers stood on raised platforms to share tales of gods and ancestors, and families brought offerings to the temple. Children stayed awake later, their faces illuminated by the soft brilliance of Nanna's glow, as they listened to stories they would one day pass on to their own children. These gatherings reinforced the connection between the lunar cycle and the shared life of the community. After the full moon, when the light waned, the calendar guided a different kind of activity. The diminishing brightness encouraged a period of reflection. Work slowed slightly. Temples conducted rituals associated with completion and closing. Contracts that had been established at the start of the month reached their midpoint. People recognized that the cycle was shifting toward darkness, but they didn't greet the waning light with apprehension. They understood that the cycle was natural, a progression that had shaped their ancestors' lives and would continue to shape the lives of their descendants. When the moon faded completely and the sky returned to its darkest state, the final days of the lunar month carried a sense of pause, not an ending, but a soft moment of waiting. Communities used this period to prepare for the new cycle. Farmers inspected tools, traders organized goods, families cleaned their homes, temples prepared fresh tablets for observations. The darkness wasn't interpreted as a loss. It was the natural breath before the next phase, a moment of stillness that allowed people to gather themselves before the crescent appeared again. As the lunar calendar became more refined, it shaped every part of society. Agricultural systems aligned with it, because the phases of the moon influenced water, soil, and planting cycles more reliably than the unpredictable behavior of weather. Legal processes aligned with it, because the beginning and middle of each cycle offered clear markers for agreements and deadlines. Religious festivals aligned with it, because the returning light symbolized the renewal of the connection between mortals and the heavens. Daily routines aligned with it, because people trusted the moon's consistency more than the changing pace of the sun, which varied in intensity and duration throughout the year. The authority of the lunar calendar grew stronger as cities expanded. Priests used it to determine the timing of major ceremonies. Councils used it to coordinate civic duties. Families used it to schedule marriages, funerals, and personal rites. The clarity of the moon's phases created a shared experience that united communities regardless of their social position. Everyone saw the same sky, followed the same cycles, and relied on the same structure. This collective rhythm strengthened the bonds between individuals, households, and larger social groups. It gave people a sense of belonging that extended beyond their immediate surroundings. In the archives of the moon temples, scribes maintained detailed records comparing lunar cycles to events on Earth. They noticed long-term patterns that extended across years. They documented how floods aligned with certain phases. They observed how migrations of animals corresponded to particular months. They recorded political events, noting whether a ruler's actions coincided with favourable or unfavourable cycles. These observations didn't turn the calendar into a tool of superstition, they turned it into a tool of understanding. People believed that Nanna revealed the structure of time through these patterns, and that scribes could interpret this structure to guide future decisions. The lunar calendar also shaped trade. Merchants depended on predictable schedules to coordinate exchanges between regions. They planned departures based on the waxing moon, when the increasing light made travel easier. They timed arrival dates according to the full moon, when night markets flourished and communities gathered to trade. The calendar provided a shared reference that connected distant settlements. Merchants travelling from one city to another could rely on the same lunar observations to maintain consistency in their agreements. This helped develop trade networks that stretched far beyond regional boundaries. In distant regions connected by these trade routes, the lunar calendar spread as part of cultural exchange. People who had never heard stories of Nanna adopted the calendar because of its practicality. They didn't need the myths to appreciate the cycle. They only needed to look at the moon. The simplicity and clarity of the lunar phases made the calendar universal. Different communities added their own rituals and interpretations, but the underlying structure remained the same. The moon's cycle became the backbone of timekeeping across vast areas where diverse cultures shared little else in common. The influence of the lunar calendar on architecture continued to grow. Builders aligned temples, shrines, and administrative complexes with lunar paths. They designed openings that captured moonlight at significant phases. They created ceremonial spaces where moonlight illuminated specific carvings or altars. These alignments weren't decorative. They reinforced the idea that human structures existed in harmony with celestial movement. When moonlight fell through an opening exactly as planned, it confirmed that the builders had understood the cycle correctly. It also reminded people that the heavens and the earth were connected through shared rhythm. The calendar's influence extended even to daily behaviour. People became accustomed to the slow transition from one phase to another. They didn't expect sudden change. They approached time with patience. They understood that progress happened gradually. This mindset shaped how they planned their lives. They didn't rush decisions. They didn't treat time as something that slipped away. They treated it as something that returned. This perspective softened anxiety and created a sense of stability that permeated their culture. The lunar calendar also helped shape the concept of destiny. If time moved in circles rather than lines, then events weren't singular occurrences. They were moments within cycles. People believed that fate unfolded gradually through these cycles. They read omens not as isolated warnings, but as part of a larger pattern. This made destiny feel less mysterious and more understandable. It wasn't something that descended suddenly. It was something that revealed itself through the steady return of familiar phases. The calendar gave people a sense of control over their lives, not by allowing them to change fate, but by helping them understand its structure. When they knew where they stood in the cycle, they felt grounded. They understood when to act, when to wait, when to seek guidance, and when to reflect. The lunar calendar didn't command obedience. It offered alignment. It gave people the chance to move with the rhythm of the world rather than against it. In this way, the lunar calendar governed civilizations not through force but through presence. Its power lay in its gentleness. It didn't impose itself. It revealed itself each night, letting people follow its guidance naturally. The calendar shaped cities, trade, rituals, architecture, agriculture, and personal behaviour. It connected people to the heavens in a way that felt intimate and steady. And at the heart of this system sat Nanna, whose light made the passage of time visible, meaningful, and approachable. As the story of the moon god continues, this calendar remains one of his greatest gifts to humanity, a structure that carried civilizations through countless generations, guiding their steps with the same calm and reliable glow that once drifted across the sky and taught the world how to understand the rhythm of time. Long before people developed a deep understanding of the forces that shaped their world, they sensed a connection between the movement of the moon and the shifting patterns of the earth itself. They noticed how water responded to the pull of something they couldn't touch, how seasons formed boundaries that returned again and again, and how the land seemed to breathe in its own slow rhythm. These observations weren't scattered or disconnected. They formed part of the same understanding that guided early civilizations as they looked to the sky for meaning. The moon didn't remain distant. Its influence extended downward, shaping what people saw, felt, and depended on. The tides, the changing seasons, and the quiet breath of the earth all reflected Nanna's presence, creating a relationship between heaven and land that shaped the fabric of life. For communities that lived near rivers, marshes, or coasts, the connection between the moon and water became one of the most important observations they made. They saw that water levels rose and fell with a rhythm that matched the movement of the moon. Even without scientific explanations, they recognized the pattern. When the moon reached certain points in its cycle, the waters surged upward. When its light dimmed or shifted, the waters receded. These patterns weren't small or subtle. They shaped entire landscapes, floodplains filled with water, nourishing fields that would later become fertile ground for planting. Marshes expanded and contracted. Shorelines transformed almost nightly. People depended on these changes, and they learned to anticipate them by watching the moon. This connection made the moon not just a symbol of time, but a force that shaped the very environment where people lived. Farmers planted seeds according to the rising waters, knowing that certain phases of the moon brought conditions that supported growth. Fishermen learned to work with the tides, timing their efforts with the movement of water. Ships travelled more easily during certain lunar phases, when the tides lifted their hulls and carried them toward new destinations. These patterns weren't interpreted as coincidences. They were understood as part of Nanna's influence, signs that his light didn't only mark time, but guided the physical world. Those who lived near rivers saw the moon's influence most clearly during floods. The moon temples kept careful records of these events, noting how the water responded to the lunar cycle. Floods weren't feared as random disasters. They were respected as part of the seasonal rhythm that ensured the land remained fertile. People relied on the renewal that followed each flood. The fresh soil left behind made the ground rich and productive. Communities learned to build their settlements in places that balanced access to water with protection from its strongest surges. The moon helped them predict when those surges would arrive, and scribes used their records to guide decisions that shaped the survival of their people. Beyond the influence on water, the moon's cycle played a role in how people understood seasons. They realized that the length of days and nights changed gradually as the moon moved through its phases. The connection wasn't immediate or obvious, but over generations the patterns became clear. The moon didn't cause the seasons, but its predictable cycle made it easier for people to measure them. They recognized that certain lunar months brought warming winds, while others brought cooler air. They associated particular phases with the behavior of plants and animals. Over time, the lunar calendar allowed them to anticipate the arrival of each season, guiding agricultural activities with greater precision. Seasonal shifts shaped everything from planting schedules to festival timing. When the moon reached phases that had historically aligned with the first signs of spring, people prepared their fields for planting. They gathered seeds stored through the winter and worked the soil with anticipation. When the moon reached phases associated with harvest seasons, communities prepared for long days of gathering crops. They celebrated the abundance with rituals that honoured the cycle of renewal. These festivals often took place beneath the bright glow of the full moon, when the night felt warm and alive with energy. The light made it possible for people to gather long after sunset, sharing food, music and stories under the open sky. The connection between the moon, the seasons and the breath of the earth wasn't only practical, it shaped how people understood the world. They believed that the earth itself had a rhythm, a kind of quiet inhaling and exhaling that matched the behaviour of natural forces. The flood season felt like a moment when the earth breathed in, gathering water and life. The harvest felt like a moment when the earth breathed out, releasing abundance. The moon helped them sense these moments, functioning like a steady clock that revealed the larger cycles hidden within the land. The breath of the earth wasn't a metaphor to them. It was a reflection of how they experienced the world's movement. This understanding influenced how people built their homes, arranged their fields, and designed their temples. They aligned structures with the directions of seasonal winds. They oriented courtyards to capture the sun during colder months and shade during warmer ones. They built canals and channels that worked in harmony with the rising and falling waters. The architecture of their cities became a reflection of their understanding of natural cycles, shaped indirectly by the lunar calendar that guided their decisions. Even the placement of certain temples was influenced by the seasonal position of moonlight. Builders chose locations where the moon could illuminate sacred spaces during important points in the cycle, reinforcing the connection between earth and sky. The breath of the earth could also be felt through the movement of animals. Herds migrated according to seasonal patterns. Birds returned during certain months. Insects emerged at predictable times. These behaviours were tied to the environment, but people understood them through the structure provided by the lunar calendar. They believed that Nanna's influence extended into the rhythms of nature, shaping the lives of animals as well as the behaviour of water and wind. This made the moon's presence feel even more integrated into the world. People didn't see nature as separate from the heavens. They saw it as a reflection of the same cycles. Farmers took special notice of how the moon influenced plant growth. They learned that seeds planted under certain phases produced healthier crops. They believed that the moon's light carried a kind of energy that strengthened the early stages of growth. When seeds were planted during the waxing moon, they noticed stronger stems and more abundant leaves. When they planted during the waning moon, they observed different patterns of growth. These experiences shaped agricultural wisdom passed down through generations. Families taught their children not only how to plant and harvest, but how to read the moon in order to support the land's natural rhythms. This agricultural knowledge became one of the most important aspects of the lunar calendar. Without it, entire regions might have struggled to survive. But with it, communities prospered. They developed sophisticated irrigation systems that relied on lunar timing. They learned to store food in ways that preserved freshness according to seasonal cycles. They managed their livestock with a deep understanding of how animals responded to the changing environment. All of this knowledge stemmed from the same source, careful observation of the moon and its influence on the physical world. The connection between the moon and the breath of the earth also shaped early healing practices. Healers believed that certain herbs gathered under specific phases of the moon had stronger properties. They observed how plants changed in potency depending on when they were harvested. They learned to use the lunar cycle to determine the best times for preparing medicines, conducting rituals, or caring for those who were ill. Their practices weren't based on superstition. They were based on patterns noticed over many generations. The moon acted as a guide, revealing cycles that helped healers understand the rhythms of the human body and its connection to the natural environment. Even the emotional life of communities reflected the influence of these cycles. People felt different during certain phases of the moon. The bright nights of the full moon brought energy that allowed them to work, travel, and celebrate. The darker nights near the end of the month encouraged introspection. These changes weren't dramatic, but they were noticeable. People adjusted their routines naturally. They rested when the night grew dark. They embraced activity when the moonlit world felt wider and more inviting. This ebb and flow became part of the cultural rhythm, shaping how communities moved through each month. In the moon temples, scribes connected these observations to the larger body of knowledge they maintained. They recorded when floods occurred, when crops were most successful, when animals migrated, and when storms arrived. They compared these events with the lunar cycles documented across generations, building a deeper understanding of how the moon influenced the breath of the earth. Their records helped guide long-term planning in cities and rural regions alike. They advised leaders on everything from crop distribution to building projects, using the lunar cycle as a framework for understanding natural behaviour. Over time, people began to notice larger cycles that stretched beyond single months or seasons. They recognized patterns that repeated every several years. They understood that droughts and periods of abundance followed rhythms of their own. These long-term cycles weren't directly tied to the moon, but the lunar calendar allowed people to track them accurately. Without the structure provided by the moon's consistent phases, these larger patterns might have been lost or misunderstood. But because the lunar calendar offered a stable foundation, communities could observe and interpret even the most subtle shifts in their environment. In this way, the moon became a symbol of continuity, not only in the heavens but in the world below. It taught people to see time as something that flowed through every part of life. It helped them understand that the earth wasn't static. It breathed in patterns that could be recognized, respected, and worked with. These patterns provided the foundation upon which ancient civilizations built their systems of agriculture, trade, healing, and community life. The breath of the earth reflected the same calm, steady influence that shaped the lunar cycle. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It moved quietly, shaping the world through gradual transitions. People learned to trust these transitions because they trusted the moon. When they saw Nanna's light rise above the horizon, they felt the connection between the heavens and the land reaffirmed. They understood that they lived within a world guided by cycles that had existed long before them and would continue long after. And as we continue this journey through Nanna's story, that quiet connection between moonlight and Earth's rhythms remains an ever-present guide, shaping the world with the same steady influence that once carried entire civilizations through their seasons, tides, and the gentle breath that marked each moment of their existence. The people who lived beneath the slow turning of the moon didn't only look to its light to measure time or guide their journeys, they also believed that within its glow and shadow lay signs that revealed the deeper structure of the world. These signs were not dramatic or supernatural in the way later myths might imagine. They were subtle, gradual, and woven into the natural rhythm of the lunar cycle. Interpreting them required patience, discipline, and a calm attentiveness that matched the pace of the moon itself. This work, known as divination, became one of the most important roles of the priests and scribes who dedicated their lives to Nanna, because they believed that the moon god spoke through patterns rather than words. In the quiet chambers of the moon temples, divination unfolded slowly. The scribes who kept records of the moon's movement were also responsible for interpreting these movements. They didn't seek messages in chaotic or unpredictable events. They turned their attention to the consistent return of phases, the appearance of slight variations, and the small irregularities that stood out against the moon's usual rhythm. These variations were believed to carry meaning, not because they were dramatic disruptions, but because they represented moments when the cycle shifted gently, creating opportunities to understand what might lie ahead. One of the earliest forms of lunar divination involved observing the first appearance of the crescent, the exact moment when the thin sliver of light returned after the moon vanished into darkness carried significance. If the crescent appeared earlier than expected, it was believed to signal favourable conditions. If it appeared later, it suggested delays or challenges. These interpretations weren't based on fear. They were based on patterns preserved across generations of observation. Scribes compared the timing of each new crescent with events that had followed in the past, creating a framework that helped them interpret what the present moment might hold. The thickness of the crescent, its angle on the horizon, and the brightness of its light also carried meaning. A clear, bright crescent signalled stability. A faint or uneven crescent suggested uncertainty or shifts in the environment. None of these signs were treated as definitive predictions. They were seen as indicators that could guide decisions. People didn't expect the moon to tell them exactly what would happen. They believed it offered hints, revealing subtle movements in the greater cycle of fate. The full moon provided another layer of insight. Its brightness allowed scribes to study its shape in detail. They observed the edges of the disk, noting whether they appeared sharp or blurred. They recorded the colour of the moon as it rose above the horizon, sometimes pale yellow, sometimes bright white, sometimes tinged with red depending on atmospheric conditions. Each variation held meaning within the system the scribes had developed. A red-tinted moon might indicate shifts in weather patterns. A particularly bright moon could signal a period of abundance. Again, these interpretations weren't isolated ideas. They were built from careful comparisons with past events documented on tablets stored in the temple archives. Divination also extended to the moon's path across the sky. The angle of its movement, the pattern of stars it passed near, and the way it appeared above certain landmarks all contributed to the interpretation. Scribes recorded how high the moon rose at specific phases and how long it remained visible before setting. If the moon deviated slightly from its usual path, the scribes treated it as a sign that something within the cycle was shifting. These shifts might align with changes in weather, political events, or agricultural conditions. The work of divination involved connecting these observations to create meaningful understanding. One of the most significant events used in lunar divination was the eclipse. Although eclipses happened infrequently, their predictability allowed scribes to treat them as markers of significant moments. An eclipse didn't cause panic. People trusted the priests, who had predicted such events long in advance. They gathered in temple courtyards to watch as the moon darkened. During these moments, the connection between light and shadow became especially meaningful. The temporary disappearance of the moon's light symbolized a pause in the cycle, a moment when fate was open to interpretation in new ways. Priests used the records of past eclipses to guide their understanding of the present, looking for patterns that aligned across centuries. Divination wasn't limited to astronomical observations. It extended into rituals that helped clarify the meaning of what was seen in the sky. Priests prepared small bowls of water and placed them where moonlight could reflect on the surface. The movement of the reflection, the clarity of the image, and the behaviour of shadows cast by the surrounding architecture added depth to their interpretations. These weren't magical practices. They were practical methods of observing how moonlight interacted with the world. The moon temples were built with precision, allowing light to fall in specific ways that supported these rituals. As the moon shifted across the sky, the reflections changed. Each change became part of the divination process. The shadows cast by the moon also held significance. During certain phases, the moonlight cast long, sharp shadows across the temple courtyards. Priests observed where these shadows fell and how they shifted throughout the night. They believed that the alignment of light and shadow revealed the balance of forces in the world. When light dominated, they predicted favourable conditions. When shadows stretched across sacred spaces, they interpreted the moment as a sign of caution. These interpretations didn't dictate decisions. They offered guidance, reminding people to align their actions with the rhythm of the world. Fire also played a role in lunar divination. Priests lit lamps or small fires during specific phases of the moon and observed how the flames reacted to the moon's light. The movement of the flame, the brightness of the fire's reflection on surrounding surfaces, and the interplay between firelight and moonlight created patterns that scribes understood through long study. The connection between the gentle glow of the moon and the flickering intensity of fire symbolized the relationship between stability and change. Observing this interaction helped priests understand how forces in the world might shift in the days or weeks ahead. Divination wasn't limited to priests alone. Families practiced small forms of lunar interpretation in their homes. They might sit on rooftops after sunset, observing the moon's shape and brightness. They looked for signs that matched the stories passed down through generations. These practices created a sense of connection, not only to the moon, but to the lineage of ancestors who had relied on the same signs. People didn't consider these moments grand events. They were quiet experiences shared with family, similar to how one might check the weather before beginning a task. The moon's presence provided reassurance, and its signs gave them something to hold on to as they planned their days. For leaders and rulers, the advice of the priests held significant weight. Before making important decisions, they sought interpretations of the lunar signs. These consultations didn't involve dramatic pronouncements. They were careful discussions where priests reviewed recent observations, compared them with older records, and explained the potential meaning of shifts in the cycle. The ruler listened, not expecting certainty, but appreciating the perspective offered by those who understood the rhythm of the moon. Decision still rested with the ruler, but the priest's insight provided grounding that helped guide choices affecting entire regions. The idea that Nanna spoke through light and shadow shaped how people approached uncertainty. Instead of seeking answers through fear or desperation, they learned to look for signs in the natural world. They understood that the moon's cycle didn't change rapidly or unpredictably. It moved slowly, giving them time to observe, interpret, and respond. This taught them patience. It encouraged them to approach challenges with calmness rather than haste. When they saw a faint or uneven crescent, they didn't panic. They adjusted their expectations and prepared for possible difficulties. When they saw a bright full moon rising with clarity, they took it as a sign of steadiness. This approach to divination shaped the emotional life of the community. It provided a sense of predictability in a world that often felt unpredictable. People lived with the understanding that the moon offered guidance through patterns, not through dramatic intervention. They didn't expect miracles, they expected rhythm. This mindset helped them navigate hardships, because they trusted that the cycle would continue and that the signs offered by Nanna would guide them through the most challenging periods. Even when storms obscured the moon or dust filled the sky, people didn't lose confidence in its influence. They understood that visibility didn't affect the cycle itself. The moon continued its path whether they could see it or not. Priests still kept track of the days, and people trusted that the crescent would return at its appointed time. This trust extended into their interpretations of fate. They believed that even when life felt unclear, the underlying pattern remained steady, waiting to reveal itself again. In the temples, the process of divination created a bridge between the physical act of observation and the emotional need for understanding. Priests used their training to interpret signs, but they didn't impose meaning where none existed. They respected the cycle's pace. If the signs were unclear, they waited. If the patterns revealed themselves gradually, they followed along. This approach created a form of divination rooted in patience rather than urgency. It helped people feel supported rather than controlled. One of the most significant aspects of lunar divination was its continuity. It didn't depend on individual skill alone. It depended on the accumulation of knowledge across generations. Scribes learned from their predecessors, preserving the wisdom of those who had come before. They compared their own observations with tablets that had been stored for hundreds of years. This continuity reinforced the belief that fate wasn't a sudden or isolated force. It was a cycle that repeated, guided by rhythms that could be understood through long-term study. The idea that Nanna spoke through light and shadow reflected the essence of his influence. His presence wasn't overwhelming. He didn't command attention through loud or forceful displays. He guided gently, offering signs that could be interpreted through close observation. The moon didn't change quickly. It showed its messages gradually, allowing people to prepare themselves for what lay ahead. This created a relationship of trust between people and the heavens. They didn't rely on the hope of sudden salvation. They relied on the steady rhythm that shaped their world. As the story of Nanna continues, the quiet interplay of light and shadow remains central. It reflects the way people learn to understand the world, not through panic or haste, but through calm observation and a deep respect for the cycles that connected their lives to the greater rhythm of the universe. Long before became a name spoken with reverence, long before its ziggurat cast a vast shadow over the river plain, the land where it would one day rise was a quiet stretch of low marshes, slow-moving waterways, and scattered settlements built from reeds and mud. The people who lived there weren't yet part of a great city. They were farmers, fishermen, herders, and traders who followed the cycles of water and moonlight as naturally as breathing. Yet even in those early communities the presence of Nanna could be felt. His light shaped their nights, his cycle shaped their lives, and over time the steady rhythm of the moon became the foundation on which would grow into one of the greatest centres of early civilization. The land that would become was defined by water. The Euphrates flowed close enough to nourish fields, and a network of smaller channels made the land fertile in ways few other places could match. People built their homes along raised patches of ground, arranging their daily routines around the patterns of the rivers. They knew that water brought life, but they also knew it required careful management. Floods could arrive unexpectedly. Marshes could expand without warning. These challenges made the people of the region deeply observant. They paid attention to the environment with a quiet, steady patience, the same patience they brought to their observation of the moon. From these early settlements came the first organised efforts to track the lunar cycle, Families gathered outside at night to observe the crescent's return. Farmers planned their planting according to the waxing phases that signalled the most promising conditions. Leaders within the small communities recognised that the moon's cycle offered something more valuable than simple illumination. It provided structure. It gave them a sense of when to prepare for seasonal transitions. It helped them time their fishing efforts, their planting, and their harvesting. Little by little, the lunar cycle began shaping communal decisions just as it shaped personal ones. As generations passed, these small settlements grew more interconnected. Trade routes developed as people exchanged fish, grain, pottery, and reeds for goods from neighbouring regions. Travellers carried stories between communities, sharing news of distant places and shaping alliances that helped create a larger sense of identity. In these stories, the moon played a central role. People spoke of Nanna's guidance during their journeys. They described how his light helped them navigate marshes or avoid dangerous terrain. These shared experiences helped unify the region around a common belief that Nanna watched over them, guiding not only their nights but the development of their society. The earliest temples built in honour of the moon god were small, made from mud bricks shaped by hand and dried in the sun. They weren't grand structures. They were quiet spaces where people left offerings after the return of the crescent, seeking blessings for their homes or their fields. These shrines served as gathering places where knowledge of the lunar cycle was shared and preserved. Priests emerged from within the community, respected not because of lineage or wealth, but because of their ability to observe the moon with accuracy and interpret its patterns. Their guidance helped shape the rhythm of daily life, and their presence made the settlements feel more cohesive. Over time, these small temples grew in importance. As the settlements expanded, people found themselves more reliant on the lunar cycle for coordinating larger projects, such as irrigation systems and communal storage. They needed a central place where observations could be recorded consistently. This responsibility fell naturally to the priests, who began keeping clay tablets with detailed notes about each phase of the moon. These early records helped ensure that knowledge didn't fade with the passing of generations. They marked the beginning of a scholarly tradition that would one day reach extraordinary precision. The rise of Ur didn't happen suddenly. It unfolded gradually, shaped by the same slow, steady rhythm that defined the moon's cycle. As the population grew, the need for organisation increased. Fields needed to be managed, irrigation channels needed to be maintained, trade needed to be coordinated. The settlements that once stood separately began merging into a larger community. Leaders emerged who understood the importance of shared timing. They relied on the priests of Nanna to determine when to begin certain projects, such as digging new canals, planting large fields, or preparing storage for seasonal floods. The earliest builders in Ur didn't imagine creating a great city. They built homes, workshops, and simple administrative buildings. These structures were arranged around open courtyards that allowed families to gather in the cool of the evening, often looking upward at the moon as it drifted across the night sky. Children learned early how to recognize the phases of the moon. They learned when to expect the return of the crescent and how to count the days between each significant moment. The lunar cycle became part of their education, not as formal instruction, but as lived experience. As continued to grow, the moon temples became more elaborate. Builders constructed larger walls, higher platforms, and more expansive courtyards where rituals could be performed. The temples weren't meant to impress through size alone. They were designed with the moon's path in mind. Openings were placed strategically so that moonlight would fall into specific chambers during key phases of the cycle. Walls were angled to capture the glow of the full moon. These architectural choices made the temple a living instrument for observing Nanna's movement. Priests could stand in particular spots and watch as moonlight illuminated signs carved into the stone, signalling important moments in the calendar. The creation of the great ziggurat marked a turning point in the city's development. It wasn't only a monumental structure, it was a declaration that the people of Ur centered their life around the moon. Rising in multiple levels, the ziggurat created a direct link between earth and sky. Its summit provided an unparalleled view of the horizon, allowing priests to observe the moon's rise with exceptional clarity. Each step of the structure carried both symbolic and practical significance. Climbing to the uppermost platform, priests could track the movement of the moon without obstruction, ensuring that their records remained accurate. From this vantage point, the city's connection to Nanna deepened. People saw the ziggurat illuminated by moonlight and felt the presence of the god in their daily lives. The light reflecting off its walls created a sense of calm that spread across the city. When the moon rose behind it, the silhouette of the ziggurat seemed to merge with the sky. This visual alignment reinforced the idea that wasn't just a place where people lived. It was a place built under Nanna's radiance, connected to the cycles that shaped the world. The influence of the lunar cycle on the city extended far beyond religious rituals. It shaped the economy. Merchants scheduled long journeys according to the phases of the moon, knowing that certain nights offered better visibility for travel. Farmers planned their work according to the lunar calendar, understanding that the moon's influence on water and soil could affect the success of their crops. Builders designed structures with lunar visibility in mind. Even administrative decisions were shaped by the cycle. The lunar calendar determined when taxes were collected, when meetings were held, and when major projects could begin. The growth of Ur's political structure also reflected its connection to Nanna. As the city became more powerful, rulers claimed legitimacy through their relationship with the moon god. They presented themselves as protectors of the lunar temples and as leaders who governed according to the rhythms revealed by the moon. Their authority wasn't portrayed as absolute. It was framed as part of a larger order shaped by the celestial cycle. This perspective made their rule feel stable and grounded, tied not to individual ambition but to a larger pattern recognized by the entire community. The people of Ur also developed a strong sense of cultural identity tied to the moon. They viewed themselves as living under the direct guidance of a god whose presence was visible every night. Stories emerged describing how the earliest ancestors of the city had received insight from Nanna, how he had guided them during difficult times, and how his light had revealed paths across the marshes when danger threatened. These stories weren't meant to be literal histories. They were cultural memories that reinforced the idea that the city had grown under the moon's protective glow. The moon temples in Ur became centres of learning. Scribes studied not only the lunar cycle but mathematics, writing, and the recording of history. They compared observations with those from earlier generations, building a body of knowledge that extended across centuries. This knowledge allowed them to predict lunar events with remarkable accuracy. Eclipses, although rare, were no longer mysterious. Their timing could be anticipated, and people trusted that the priests would guide them through these moments with calm and understanding. The ability to predict such events strengthened the credibility of the temple and deepened the people's belief in Nanna's influence. As Ur expanded, new districts formed around the central temple complex. Homes became more elaborate, markets grew, craft specialists gained prominence. Potters, metalworkers, weavers, and carpenters contributed to the city's prosperity. Their work was shaped by the lunar calendar, which dictated the timing of trade, production cycles, and travel routes. Even the organisation of the markets aligned with the moon's phases. On nights of full brightness, markets stayed open longer, allowing families to gather and trade beneath the open sky. On darker nights, the markets grew quieter, mirroring the moon's retreat. The ziggurat became a symbol of this connection between daily life and the heavens. People didn't only see it as a religious structure, they saw it as the heart of their city, a place that represented order, stability, and continuity. Its stairways were worn smooth by the passage of countless feet. Its walls bore the marks of sun, wind, and time. Yet each night, when the moon rose, it shone with a clarity that made people pause in their routines. Whether they were tending fires, carrying goods, or speaking quietly with neighbours, They often stopped for a moment to watch the moonlight fall across the structure. These quiet pauses helped maintain the connection between the bustling city and the slow, calm rhythm of the lunar cycle. The city's rituals reflected this connection as well. During the new crescent, families brought offerings to the temple. They walked along streets illuminated by lamps and moonlight, carrying baskets with grain, bread, or small crafted items. They placed these offerings respectfully near the altars, acknowledging the start of a new cycle. These gatherings strengthened the sense of community and reminded people that their lives were part of a larger rhythm. During the full moon, the city felt different. The streets glowed with soft light. Children played longer. Elders sat outside listening to the distant sounds of music drifting from temple courtyards. People shared meals in open spaces, enjoying the cooler air of the night. The full moon wasn't only a visual event. It shaped the emotional atmosphere of the city. It made people feel connected, safe, and grounded. As continued its rise, the influence of Nanna remained constant. Even as political power shifted, as trade expanded, as new technologies and crafts emerged, the lunar cycle stayed at the centre of the city's identity. Leaders came and went, empires rose and fell, but the moon's cycle remained unchanged, guiding the city through every era. This stability gave a sense of continuity that helped it endure challenges and maintain its place as a centre of culture, learning, and spiritual connection. The rise of wasn't only the story of a city's expansion, it was the story of how a civilization grew around the steady presence of the moon. Every wall, every street, every ritual, every decision carried the imprint of Nanna's influence. People didn't simply live in they lived under his radiance, guided by the glow that drifted across the night sky and shaped their understanding of time, nature, and the world they built together. And as the journey continues, this quiet light remains central, illuminating the path forward just as it once illuminated the ancient marshes, where the first settlers of looked upward and found guidance in the silver glow that would one day define their entire civilization. As grew into one of the most influential cities of its time, its moonlit courtyards and temple walls became the meeting place for ideas of every kind. Knowledge expanded as scribes refined their records, priests deepened their understanding of the lunar cycle, and generations of observers contributed to the growing archives. But with this expansion came differences in interpretation. Not every observer agreed on the meaning of the moon's movements. Not every scholar believed that fate could be read clearly through its phases, and not every thinker accepted the same stories about how Nanna shaped the world. These differences didn't weaken the city, they enriched it, allowing ideas to intermingle and evolve beneath the quiet radiance of the moon. The scholars of came from many backgrounds. Some grew up within the temple walls, learning from priests who taught them to read clay tablets and track lunar phases. Others came from families of traders, artisans, or farmers, bringing with them a practical understanding of cycles shaped by their surroundings. What united them was their dedication to understanding the patterns that governed the world. They gathered in temple courtyards during the evening, sitting near the cool stone walls as the moon rose overhead. They debated ideas softly, comparing observations taken on different nights or discussing the meaning of subtle changes in the moon's behaviour. These scholars didn't see themselves as challengers to the priests. They saw themselves as partners in the pursuit of understanding. Their questions didn't arise from disbelief. They arose from curiosity. They wanted to know why the moon sometimes appeared larger on the horizon. They wanted to understand why certain floods aligned more closely with particular lunar months. They wanted to explore the relationship between the moon's path and the movements of planets that drifted across the sky. Their work didn't diminish the role of Nanna. It expanded the scope of knowledge, helping people understand the world with greater precision. But as their discussions grew more complex, a new group emerged. Those who took a more cautious approach to interpreting the moon's signs. These were the skeptics, individuals who trusted the cycle but questioned the meanings assigned to it. They didn't deny the moon's influence, They saw its effect on tides, seasons, agriculture, and timekeeping. Their skepticism wasn't directed at the cycle itself. It was directed at the interpretations that surrounded it. They wondered whether some signs attributed to Nanna were simply natural variations. They questioned whether every faint crescent or dim full moon carried meaning. They believed in the rhythm of the cycle but approached its interpretation with restraint. The skeptics didn't oppose the priests. They didn't argue loudly or attempt to dismantle the system that held the city together. They contributed to discussions quietly, offering alternative explanations that encouraged deeper reflection. Their voices made the work of divination more rigorous. Priests refined their interpretations by addressing these concerns. Scribes compared data more carefully. Scholars re-examined their assumptions. The skeptics weren't obstacles. They were catalysts that pushed knowledge forward, ensuring that interpretations didn't drift into complacency. In the temples, the presence of both scholars and skeptics created a dynamic that strengthened the body of knowledge. Priests learned to welcome questions, understanding that doubt didn't weaken faith, it refined it. They knew that the moon had influenced humanity long before they were born and would continue to influence humanity long after they were gone. Their goal wasn't to defend their interpretations rigidly. Their goal was to understand the rhythm as clearly as possible. When skeptics pointed out inconsistencies, the priests added new tablets to the archives, documenting the variations carefully. Over time, these records formed the foundation of more accurate interpretations. The conversations between scholars, skeptics, and priests often unfolded in the cool hours of the evening. The air felt still, the city quieted. The light of the moon spread evenly across the courtyard stones. In this environment, ideas moved gently from one person to another. Voices remained low, arguments remained steady. The rhythm of discussion mirrored the slow pace of the moon drifting overhead. These evenings helped shape the intellectual life of Ea. They created a culture where knowledge grew collaboratively, supported by a respect for both tradition and inquiry. Philosophers emerged within this environment, individuals who sought to understand the deeper relationship between human life and the cycles of nature. They wrote long reflections on clay tablets, exploring how the moon's steady movement shaped the concepts of change, stability, and continuity. They believed that the world followed patterns larger than any one person could fully understand. These reflections didn't claim certainty. They offered interpretations meant to provoke thought. Their ideas travelled through the city, carried by students, merchants, and travellers who visited the temples. Some of these philosophers argued that the moon revealed universal truth through its silence. They saw its quiet presence as a reminder that understanding didn't always require words. They believed that the moon taught people how to observe patiently, how to accept gradual change, and how to find meaning in repetition. They wrote that the cycle of the moon reflected the cycle of life, growth, fullness, decline, and renewal. They treated the lunar calendar not only as a tool for measuring time, but as a guide for understanding human experience. Their ideas resonated with many people, offering perspective during moments of uncertainty. Other thinkers focused on the practical benefits of the lunar cycle. They analysed how the moon influenced tides, agriculture, and travel. They wrote about the importance of aligning human activities with natural rhythms. They encouraged rulers to use the lunar calendar for scheduling major projects and civic events. Their work reinforced the practical foundations of the city's reliance on the moon. They believed that Nanna's influence extended into the physical world, and they sought to understand that influence through observation and measurement. The skeptics contributed to these discussions by pointing out the limitations of interpretation. They reminded others that the moon's behaviour wasn't always tied to events on Earth. They argued that some coincidences might not carry deeper meaning. They encouraged caution when drawing conclusions from small variations in the cycle. Their presence ensured that interpretations didn't become overly confident or rigid. They helped prevent misunderstandings that could arise from seeing patterns where none existed. Their role was not to undermine belief, but to strengthen understanding. Despite their differences, All of these groups, priests, scholars, skeptics, and philosophers, shared a deep respect for the lunar cycle. They understood that their perspectives were shaped by the same steady light. Their disagreements didn't create divisions within the city. Instead, they created layers of insight that enriched the culture. People in understood that knowledge grew through the combined efforts of many individuals. They accepted that different interpretations could coexist without conflict. This openness allowed the city to develop a sophisticated understanding of the moon's influence. The silence of the moon became a central theme in these discussions. The moon revealed its patterns without sound or speech. It didn't explain itself. It simply moved, offering its signs through light and shadow. The silence wasn't empty. It held meaning for those who knew how to observe. Scholars saw it as an invitation to study. Priests saw it as a form of communication. Skeptics saw it as a reminder to approach interpretation carefully. Each group projected its own understanding onto the silence, creating a rich tapestry of perspectives that continue to evolve. This silence shaped the emotional atmosphere of the city. People felt comfort in the quiet presence of the moon. They knew that its cycle remained steady regardless of human concerns. When challenges arose, floods, conflicts, shortages, people looked to the sky and found reassurance in the familiar glow. The silence reminded them that the world was larger than their immediate struggles. It grounded them, helping them maintain perspective in difficult times. Even during peaceful periods, the silence played a role in the city's rhythm. Families gathered on rooftops to watch the moon rise, finding calm in the lack of words required for the moment. Children fell asleep under its light. Elders sat in quiet contemplation. Workers ended their day by looking upward for a brief moment before returning home. These small experiences strengthened the connection between the people and the celestial rhythm that shaped their lives. The silence also influenced the artistic life of Potters carved lunar symbols into their work. Musicians composed pieces inspired by the slow movement of the moon. Scribes recorded stories that explored the relationship between humanity and the heavens. These artistic expressions helped preserve the culture's understanding of the lunar cycle. They ensured that the connection between the moon and the people of remained strong even as generations changed. As knowledge continued to expand, some scholars began exploring the limits of what could be known through observation alone. They wondered whether the moon's influence extended beyond the physical world. They speculated about connections between the lunar cycle and human emotion, dreams, or memory. They wrote long reflections on the nature of time, exploring how the cycle shaped the human experience of past, present, and future. These ideas didn't claim to provide definitive answers. They offered possibilities that encouraged others to think more deeply about the world. The skeptics acknowledged these ideas but approached them with caution. They appreciated the desire to understand, but they also recognized the danger of stretching interpretation too far. They argued that the moon's influence should be grounded in observable patterns. They encouraged scholars to test their ideas carefully, comparing them with existing records. Their contributions ensured that speculation didn't overshadow the foundation of knowledge built through generations of observation. The priests continued to interpret signs through their rituals, drawing on the vast archives preserved in the temples. They welcomed the input of scholars and skeptics, recognizing that collaboration strengthened the accuracy of their work. They maintained the rituals that connected the people to Nanna, ensuring that the spiritual dimension of the cycle remained central to the city's identity. Their interpretations evolved as new insights emerged, demonstrating that tradition and knowledge didn't need to stand apart. They could grow together, guided by the steady presence of the moon. In this environment of conversation, observation, and reflection, thrived. The city became a place where ideas flowed as steadily as the moonlight that illuminated its walls each night. People felt grounded by the combination of scholarship and faith, skepticism and reverence. They knew that their understanding of the world was shaped by many perspectives working together. The silence of the moon remained at the heart of this process. It represented a presence that didn't demand interpretation but invited it. It shaped the rhythm of life without imposing itself. It allowed people to approach understanding at their own pace, guided by the slow movement of light across the sky. And as the story continues into the final part of this journey, that silence remains, holding within it the steady rhythm that has guided generations and continues to illuminate the world with the same gentle, unchanging glow. Across countless generations, long after the first scribes shaped wet clay into careful records, and long after the great cities of early civilizations rose and fell, the presence of the moon has continued its steady path across the sky. The world has changed in every imaginable way, yet the same pale glow that once guided farmers through marshlands and illuminated the ziggurat of Earth still reaches us each night. It does not rush. It does not fade. It does not bend to the pace of the world below. Its rhythm remains unchanged, and because of this unbroken continuity, people still look upward and feel something quiet move within them. Whether they call the moon a god, a clock, a companion, or a mystery, they recognize the same truth that shaped the earlier stories. The moon watches the world with a calmness that has outlasted every era. For those who lived thousands of years ago, Nanna wasn't simply a divine figure. He represented stability in a world where storms, floods, and shifting landscapes could unsettle entire communities. His cycle gave people a way to understand time when there were no devices, no standardized calendars, no mechanical tools to guide them. Everything relied on observation. People learned the difference between expectation and surprise by studying the moon's phases. When the crescent returned at its expected moment, they felt grounded. When it appeared late, they adjusted their expectations with steady patience. The moon taught them to trust slow processes. It taught them to accept change as part of a larger rhythm. This ancient connection hasn't disappeared, even though the tools people use to measure time have grown more complex. Clocks have taken the place of lunar calendars. Satellites track celestial patterns with precision far greater than anything the scribes of Ur could have imagined. People don't depend on the moon to schedule their planting or determine the timing of their journeys. Yet the influence remains, not in the form of necessity, but in the form of instinct. Even now, people step outside on clear nights, look upward, and pause for a moment without fully understanding why. The moon still affects the mind with a quiet pull that mirrors the rhythm of ancient life. In cities filled with lights, towers, and constant movement, the moon's presence cuts through the noise. It doesn't compete with the brightness of the modern world. It simply stays where it has always been, following its cycle regardless of what people build beneath it. That constancy offers something people rarely find in their daily routines. It offers a reminder that even in a fast-paced world, some rhythms remain beyond the reach of human influence. The moon's cycle still stretches across weeks and months, unchanged by schedules, deadlines, or obligations. People may rush through their days, but the moon moves patiently, creating a natural counterbalance to the speed of modern life. The emotional connection that ancient people felt toward the moon remains familiar today. When the full moon rises, it catches attention in a way that few natural events can. It brightens the night sky enough to reshape the landscape, casting shadows that stretch across fields, rooftops, and open spaces. Animals react to it. People notice it during late walks or while looking out of windows. The full moon still inspires gatherings, even if people no longer tie these gatherings to rituals or agricultural cycles. Some take photographs. Others spend time outside enjoying the cooler light. The effect isn't mystical in the sense that ancient civilizations would have understood it, but it carries the same sense of presence. It offers the same feeling of calmness that once guided priestly rituals in the moon temples of Ur. This continuity raises a natural truth that ancient people understood long before modern science explained the lunar cycle. The moon shapes life in subtle, far-reaching ways. It influences tides that move across coastlines. It affects patterns in animal behavior. It stabilizes the Earth's rotation, creating the conditions that make life possible. People may not attribute these forces to the will of a god today, but they still live within the effects of the same ancient rhythm. The moon's presence has always been part of the environment that shapes human existence, and it remains that way now. The scholars of early civilizations saw the moon as a teacher. They believed its movement reflected deeper truths about time. They understood that the moon didn't simply mark the passage of days, it revealed the structure of cycles that shaped everything around them. This idea hasn't disappeared. In the modern world, people still use cycles to understand their lives. Seasonal patterns influence behavior. Biological rhythms shape sleep, energy, and emotion. The concept of repeating phases continues to shape how people view progress and change. Even without connecting these patterns to a deity, people live within a world guided by cyclical processes that echo the structure of the lunar cycle. The skeptics who once challenged the interpretations of priests also mirror a familiar part of modern thought. They understood the importance of questioning assumptions, of distinguishing between observable patterns and imagined ones. This balance between belief and inquiry shaped the intellectual life of ancient Ur, and it continues to shape scientific understanding today. The moon remains a place where observation, curiosity, and interpretation intersect. People study it through telescopes, probe it with spacecraft, and analyze its composition with scientific rigor. Yet the quiet sense of connection persists alongside the science. The silence of the moon still encourages reflection, even as new discoveries unfold. The moon also continues to shape human imagination. Writers draw inspiration from its glow. Artists depict its phases. Musicians compose pieces influenced by its gentle presence. Even in modern storytelling, the moon appears as a symbol of guidance, reflection, transition, and clarity. It represents the passage of time in a way that feels deeply human. This connection to creativity mirrors the artistic expressions found in ancient Ur, where potters carved lunar symbols into their work and musicians played songs in temple courtyards beneath the full moon. The belief that the moon watches over the world isn't taken literally by most people today, but the feeling behind it remains. People still sense that the moon carries an ancient presence, a sense of continuity that stretches across the entire span of human history. The same light that shone on the marshland settlements of early Mesopotamia shines on modern cities. The same phases that guided the earliest calendars appear above crowded streets and quiet fields alike. The moon reminds people that they are part of a long story, one that began long before their lives and continues long after. In quiet moments, when someone stands outside and looks upward, the experience often mirrors what ancient people felt. The moon doesn't demand attention. It doesn't pull the gaze with force. It invites the mind to slow down. It creates a moment where time feels less like a line rushing forward and more like a gentle cycle that returns again and again. People may not think of Nanna by name, but they often feel the same sense of stillness that ancient civilizations associated with him. That stillness carries the memory of a god who watched over time itself, shaping how people understood the world. This is why, even now, the moon feels like more than a distant object in the sky. It carries with it the legacy of every story ever told beneath its glow. It holds the memory of the temples built in its honor, the scholars who studied its movement, the skeptics who questioned interpretations, the travelers who navigated by its light, and the families who marked the passing of months by watching its changing shape. Every phase brings with it the echo of ancient cycles that once defined the lives of entire civilizations. The moon continues to watch the world not because of divine intention, but because its presence hasn't changed. Its silence still speaks in the way it once did. It still reveals patterns that shape the world. It still offers a sense of stability in times of uncertainty. It still guides the movement of water, influences the behavior of life, and marks the rhythm of nights that unfold with the same gentle pace as they did thousands of years ago. The ancient god of time remains present in the form of the cycle he once governed. People may no longer build great temples in his honor, but the quiet connection to the moon persists. The glow that once illuminated the ziggurat of still illuminates the earth. The rhythm that once guided the lives of priests and scribes still shapes the natural world, and the silence that once invited reflection still encourages people to look upward and find calmness in the steady movement of light across the sky. As this long journey reaches its final turn, the same soft glow continues to accompany it, moving with the same patience that once taught humanity to understand time not as something fleeting or forceful, but as something that unfolds slowly and returns gently, just as the moon has always done.